Hey everyone, Ryan here, and in this video we're going to go over my process of creating this image, starting inside of Photoshop where we cut the image out from the background, or the subject out from the background. We're going to bring that subject cut out into Blender where we're going to use it to help build our 3D scene, and then we're going to bring those 3D elements back into Photoshop and combine everything into one cohesive image. One more thing, if you want to follow along, you can download the project files for free. Just check out the description below, and let's get started. Before we get started, just a quick shout out to Anthony from GFX Soul Studios. He's the photographer who took this image that I'm editing. Here's his website right here, gfxsoulstudios.com, or you can check him out on Instagram, gfxsoulstudios. So thanks, Anthony, for letting me edit your image. As usual, the first thing I do inside of Photoshop is I get my framing set up and set up my aspect ratio. So this image was shot portrait orientation, but I don't edit typically with portrait orientation, so we're just going to flip that. We'll go ahead and apply that aspect ratio and crop. And then before we get started, we're just going to create a blank background image just so we can kind of see what we're going on. I'm going to change the solid color to something that matches what's already there a little bit. Hey, Ryan from the future here. Real quick, after I get my initial composition and framing done and getting my aspect ratio and crop set up inside of Photoshop, I'll then do my initial basic exposure adjustments and my skin cleanup, such as skin retouching and smoothing or dodging and burning. And then I'll move on to my cutout phase where I cut my subject out from the background and then go on to 3D. So real quick, I'm going to just show you my initial steps there and then we'll continue on. Okay, so for skin retouching, I like to keep it pretty simple. I'll just create a duplicate of my background layer, and what I'll do is I'll just go in and I'll start creating, using the healing brush tool or the clone stamp tool, I'll just start removing little blemishes, or so just like maybe stray hairs that are over areas, or any kind of temporary blemishes that's not part of the skin normally, acne and stuff like that. Just cleaning up major distractions or anything, like maybe the lighting doesn't look so good on a certain area, so I'll smooth out some of the lighting values. I generally don't like to go overboard, but this part of the phase of skin retouching is entirely just up to your own style as a photographer, the way you like to retouch. So don't follow what I'm doing exactly. This is just what I do for my process. So again, I'll just go in with the clone stamp tool to just clean up any kind of major blemishes, smooth out any kind of makeup lines and whatnot, but nothing too crazy. Once I've done that, then I'll move on to frequency separation, which is basically just another level of kind of smoothing out the values of the skin. So you can download a frequency separation action from Google. Just look up frequency separation Photoshop, and there's a bunch of free ones. It's fairly simple, but basically what it does is it just it separates out the texture from the colors of your image. So this is just the textures of the image, and if I turn that off, we can see the low frequency, which is just the colors, and it combines them together and you get your normal image. And all I'm doing on the frequency separation is I'm just clicking on the low frequency layer. I'm going to grab a lasso tool with a 20-25 feathering megapixels, or 20-25 pixel feathering, just depending on the size of your image. And then I'll just start selecting areas of the skin that I think I could smooth out some of the colors. So this area right here, I'll select around there. I'll go up to filter, blur, Gaussian blur, and if I just bring up this radius, you'll just look in this area right here around the selection. If I bring it all the way down, that's nothing, and if I bring it up, you can just see it kind of blurs those colors a bit more. And that just kind of helps create a little bit smoother transition of colors and values and evens out skin tones a bit. So I'll just do that over there, filter, and repeat that. Alt-Control F to redo that last filter, which is blurring. And then, depending on different areas of the skin, you'll want to probably use a smaller blur value, nothing quite as strong. And again, if you look up frequency separation tutorials online, you'll find a lot of different tutorials that go over this process way more in depth than me, and they're usually way more skilled than me. I don't like to go too crazy with my skin retouching, so I keep it pretty simple. Just a little bit of skin smoothing and values retouching. Get rid of any kind of temporary skin blemishes, things that would be gone in a week, stuff like that. And so since I have that blur action already done, I'm just selecting different areas and click on the shortcut up here to redo this last action, which is Alt, Control, and F. And yeah, I mean that's pretty much it that I'll do for skin smoothing. I won't do too much. What I'll do is I'll click on that frequency separation group and press Control E, and that just flattens it all down into one layer. So now I can just toggle on the skin smoothing layer, just like that. And then at this point, I'll do some dodging and burning, which again is just basically painting in light and shadows on the image to help give it a little bit of pop and whatnot. So I just created a dodge and burn action, and all that action does is it creates two curves layers, one that darkens the image, one that brightens the image. And so if I click on the burn layer and get my brush, let's set it to like a low hardness with like a flow, just 100, so you can see what's happening. If I start painting white, you can see it just darkens image. And on the dodge layer, if I start painting on the layer mask, it just brightens. That's all it's doing. Before I start actually dodging and burning, I want to really quickly go over the concepts of what dodging and burning is. And what that is having a good understanding of form and shape and how light reacts. So to demonstrate that, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to create a new layer. Just a circle. I'm going to fill it with 50% gray. Let me create one more layer above that and clip it. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to get a brush tool. And so right now we're looking at a circle, and it looks flat because it is flat. It's just a 2D circle. But if I paint in shadow, just painting in black around the bottom here, and I paint white around the top of it here, all of a sudden it looks like a three-dimensional object. It looks like a sphere, a ball, right? So if I turn this off, flat circle, no shape, no depth to it at all. It's just very obviously a 2D circle. And by painting a little bit of shadow and a little bit of highlight, all of a sudden it looks like a shape. And you can tell, oh yeah, there's some light coming from the top and it's casting a shadow across here. There's an infinite number of possibilities you can do. I can paint light up here and paint shadow over here, and it looks like there's a light hitting the circle or the sphere coming from this direction. So those concepts of understanding form and how light and shadows react to that form is what you need to carry over when you're doing dodging and burning. So it's just a little bit more complicated, but let's start with something simple like this arm. Dodging is highlights and burning is shadows. So if I see this form, this arm, I could think of this arm as a cylinder. This portion of the arm right here, I can think of that as a cylinder, and I can treat it as such when I'm painting in the shadows and the highlights. And you also have to consider where the light is coming from. In this case, the light is coming from the left and right side of the arm, and the shadows mostly in the center of it. So I just want to enhance what's already there by painting in shadows and highlights. So I'm going to paint in some more shadow on the center of this object, or in the center of this arm. Let's turn the opacity up to like 25%. So I'm going to paint in a little bit more shadow in the center of the arm. And then I'm going to go to my dodge layer and paint in a little bit more highlights on the sides. And all I'm doing is treating it and painting it the same way I would as if it was a sphere. I would paint in shadow and highlight on that sphere depending on where I want the light and shadow to be. And the same thing with this arm. So if I turn this dodge and burn layer off and on, and just looking at the arm here, just look at this portion of the arm, you can see if I turn this off, obviously there's already lighting and shadow on it, but if I turn this on and off, you can just see this arm pops a little bit more. It has a little bit more depth to it. And so that's the goal when you're dodging and burning, is to add depth to your 2D image, to make it pop a little bit better. And it could be a little bit complicated when you're dealing with things like the face, because it's no longer a perfect sphere, but there's portions on the face that follow basic geometry, like this part of the cheek right here. You can tell that the shadow the light is hitting this portion of the cheek right here, and thus this will be a little bit brighter, and then this is in shadow, and so the shadows here will be a little bit darker. And you can see I did it very badly, but you can see by just turning this shadow, the dodge and burn layer off and on, you can see this area of the skin or the face pops a bit more. And I'm gonna go redo that so it's a little bit better looking, because it does look pretty bad. But again, all you're doing is just you're painting in shadows and highlights on different parts of the image to enhance what's already there. So I'm gonna just delete those layer masks and reapply them, and start from scratch. And I'm just going to speed through this, and you can just watch what I'm doing as I kind of speed up the video a bit. But all I'm doing is the same thing that I just showed you, painting shadows and highlights in different areas to help make the image pop a bit more. Okay, cool. And that's basically it. So if I just turn on and off and on this dodge and burn layer, you'll see that the image just kind of pops. So off, you can see, especially around the face and area and the arms, just looks kind of flat. And then as soon as you turn this on, boom, just pops a bit more. And generally the strength of that is too much because my eyes are getting used to it. So I'll turn it down to 0 and I'll just bring it back up again. And just kind of stop when I think it looks pretty good. And usually that's anywhere from like 60 to 70% of what I originally had. And something like that just kind of helps it pop a bit more. And then one more thing in terms of dodging and burning, or one more layer of that, is you can really have the eyes pop a bit more too by doing the same thing again, but just on a smaller scale and just like on something like the eyes. So I'll create a curves adjustment layer, bring it up a bit, invert that layer mask. I'll create another curves adjustment layer, bring it down a bit, invert that layer mask. Oops, click on the layer mask and invert it. We'll call this eye dodge. And we'll call this eye. Oops, come on. We'll call this eye burn. And just, again, just like before, painting in on a part of that layer. And then burning. And you can see here, if I turn that on and off, boom, the eye just pops a bit more. So that's it for my basic initial retouchings, is the skin smoothing and the dodging and burning. Then I'll move on to the cutting out phase, which I'm going to go over right now. Now that I got a good framing that I like, I'm going to start by cutting my subject out from the background. So because my character is on, or my subject is on, a seamless backdrop, I can usually get away with starting with the select subject tools inside of Photoshop. So I'm just going to click on this quick selection tool right here, and then with the subject layer, let's call it subject, with the subject layer selected, I can click on select subject at the top of my screen here. And Photoshop does a pretty good job of creating a basic starting point for the mask. As you can see here, it's selected my subject. It's not perfect, but we'll adjust this in a bit. So what I want to do is just with this quick selection tool enabled, I'm just going to go in here and select some more of these areas of the hair down here. Get a little bit of this hair down here. I'm not too worried about the floor right now. It's okay that we get some of this floor bits around our subject, but for now, let's just try and get a good starting point. Okay, cool. So no major holes in our selection anywhere that I can see. I'm going to zoom in here and just kind of get rid of this area right here of the hair and some of that bits. Get rid of that. Get rid of that. And what I'm doing with the quick selection tools, I'm just holding Alt to erase away parts of the selection. If I want to add parts to the selection, like this bit under here, I'll just use the standard left click. Actually, I want to remove that, sorry. So let's just remove that part. Okay, cool. So let's see what we're working with here. I'm just going to go ahead and click on layer mask button. Okay, so I have my subject cut out from the background, and if I alt click on the layer mask thumbnail of my layer, I can see what my layer mask looks like, and there's no major glaring issues that I can see right now. Now, it's not perfect. You can see here just like little bits of the edges around here are kind of messed up, especially around the hair, but I'm going to show you how we can get a pretty decent layer mask cutout of the hair. So what I'm going to do first is I'm going to go ahead and just clean up this layer mask. So I'm going to use a tablet pencil or a Wacom pen, and I'm just going to use a standard Photoshop brush to go around the edges and making sure that I have my layer mask selected. That's this black and white thumbnail. With that selected, I can paint away, I can bring back or hide parts of my layer. Whoops. So let's just turn the hardness all the way up and the size down a little bit, and we can see what's going on here. So by painting with white, it shows the original image, and you can see this really well if I paint down here. I'm bringing back parts of the original image by painting white on the layer mask, and if I paint black, it erases. So I'm just going around the edges of my subject, and let's make this brush a little bit softer. And I'm just going to try and clean up some of these edges and see if we can make it look just a little bit nicer. It doesn't have to be perfect. Again, I'm not even going to look at the hair. In fact, what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually bring in the layer mask a bit on all these edges of the hair, because I'm going to have another technique that I'm going to show you how to get a pretty decent selection of the hair when you're using something like a seamless backdrop like this. If you're shooting like in the city or in a busy environment where there's a lot of distractions and objects and stuff behind your subject, then this technique that I'm showing you probably won't work too well. But again, if you're shooting on a seamless backdrop or a white wall or something that's just kind of plain, this technique I'm going to show you should work pretty well most of the time. And it might require a little bit of adjusting. But yeah, we'll go over that. So right now I'm actually just removing parts of the hair because we're going to bring back all those edges in a bit. So any part of the hair that you see that's kind of semi-transparent, that's showing the background, and just to help us see, visualize what we're doing here, I'm actually going to change the color of this solid backdrop to something very different from my original image. And I think there's not a lot of greens or yellows in my original image. So by having a backdrop behind my subject as yellow, we'll have a good idea of what is transparent and what's not. So go back to that layer mask, and we're just going to continue painting away edges of this hair. Again, this does not have to look good. For everything that's not hair, like skin, the edges, I am going to clean those edges up if I can. Parts of the arm here got kind of cut off, so just bringing those back. This hair, I'm going to get rid of these edges. They look pretty good right now, but I'm going to make them better. So still just going around the edges of my subject. And you really don't got to be too perfect with this, because most of the time people aren't zoomed in this far anyway. But, you know, you can be as OCD about it as you want. I'm just going to go around these edges, clean up some of this. So as you can see, I have a pretty good starting point for my layer mask. My subject is cut out. It's a pretty smooth, even mask all around my subject, except for the areas around my hair. So this brings me back to the technique that I'm going to show you for getting out a good key or selection of the hair. So I'm going to go ahead and just turn this back to something that's kind of matching my subject color a bit. Something like that, something a little neutral. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to duplicate my subject layer. So let's turn off the original one that we have, and let's go ahead and delete this layer mask on the copy. So we just have our regular image, our starting point. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the Channels tab inside of Photoshop, or any kind of photo editor should, or most photo editors should have a Channels tab. If you don't see this, just click on Window and click on Channels here, and that tab should show up somewhere. Now what you see here is it says RGB, and that's by default. You have that selected. You're viewing your image with all three channels, red, green, and blue, turned on. Now if I click on any one of these, the red, green, or blue, I'm getting a black and white representation of just those colors. So the goal here is to find what channel has the greatest amount of contrast, that's difference, between the hair color and the background image. And we're looking at the blue channels right here, and as you can see, there's almost no difference between the background and the hair color. So that's not good. The green, we're looking better. The hair is a little bit darker than the backdrop. But if I look at the red channel, you can really see the difference between the hair color and the backdrop. And this is a good starting point to create a layer mask. So basically what we're going to do is we're going to right click that red channel and duplicate it. And let's just call it hair selection. Okay, so now that you've duplicated that, making sure that you're only looking at that hair selection channel that you just created and nothing else. So there should only be one eyeball next to the hair selection tool. We are going to press Control or Command I to invert that. And then what we're going to do is we're going to press Control or Command L to bring up the levels tool. And what we're going to do is we're just going to bring in these sliders. This top left one is the black point. We're going to bring that up so that the background is black. And then we're going to bring that right slider in. That's the white point. Bring that in so that the interior, or the solid parts of our hair, oops, didn't mean to click that. Oh gosh, what are we doing? Okay. we're bringing the white point slider in, so that way the interior of our hair is as white as can be. And what we're looking at here is to have a nice clean selection of the hair where we can see all the bits of hair strands, and the interior of the hair is still white and the background is black. We're not really paying attention to the skin here, or the subject, or the goggles here, or the hand. We're only looking at the hair. That's all that matters for this process, because we have a good key, we have a good selection everywhere else except for the hair. So again, we're just trying to adjust these levels, the black point and the white point, until we have something that gives us a good representation of the edges of our hair. This looks pretty good. Actually, I'm going to bring this black point in a little bit more, so it's pure black around the edges. Great. Now I'm going to hit, I don't know why I keep doing that. I'm going to hit OK. So now that we're here, what we want to do is press Control or Command and left click on the hair selection thumbnail that we just created. And what that does is it creates a selection based on the white and black values of this image that we are looking at right now. Anything that's black is transparent, anything that's white is selected, and anything that's gray is a varying level of opacity. So now, before we move on, we're going to click back under the RGB channel at the very top, and all that does is make sure that we're looking at the image properly, but we still have that same selection. Let's go back to the Layers tab, and then on that new duplicated subject, we're going to call this hair. And we are going to click on the layer mask button, making sure that we still have that selection from earlier. And now, as you can see, we have a selection of our subject based on that mask that we created earlier. So if I alt click on the layer mask of this, we can see this is what the layer mask looks like. But we don't want everything, right? So let's click back onto our subject layer. Okay, and so now we have a good selection of the edges of our hair. We can see that we have all these nice hair strand details around the edges of our hair. We're not worried about all this other parts of our image that's not selected properly, because we already have that layer mask on this layer below, right? So if I turn on this original cutout that we created, where we drew on the layer mask to clamp the edges, and if I bring this hair mask underneath our subject layer and turn that on, I'll toggle this on and off. You can see this hair stuff appears only in the edges where we previously didn't have hair. This is good. This means we have an almost perfect selection of the edges of our hair. Especially down here, you can see that if I turn this off, and if I turn that hair selection back on, we have all this nice detail. But the problem is we also have all these details everywhere else, and we don't want that, because these are also varying levels of bright and darks. So what we're going to do is we are going to create a new group and drag our hair layer into that group. We'll call this hair mask or something, I guess. And with that group selected, we're going to press Alt and click on the layer mask to create an inverted layer mask. So now, if I just turn off our subject layer, we can see we have nothing, right? Because the layer mask for this group is black. Nothing inside of this group is being seen. So let's turn our subject back on, click on the hair mask layer of the group called hair mask, and then with a brush tool, we're just going to paint white to reveal that part of the group that we want. And we're only going to paint that in around the edges of our hair. So again, what we're doing is we put that hair selection that we made earlier inside of a group. We add a black layer mask to that group so the whole group is invisible. And now we are just painting white on the layer mask of that group, just around the edges of the hair where we want more of that detail. And that's looking good. Whoops. And let's see if we can get anything down here too. So down here, the image is a bit darker, right? So because the image is so much darker, if we look at the layer mask of the hair layer, we can see that while up here we have a good level of separation between the backdrop and the hair, down here, this hair, because it's closer to the ground, we don't have that same level of separation. So this parts of the ground is going to be visible if we paint that back in. Up here it might do good, but down here not so much. So let's click out of the layer mask. Let's go back to the group layer mask called hair mask. And let's just hide that again. We don't want that right now. what we can do, well, first let's bring back some of this part up top, because this part was okay. So what we can do is we can duplicate this hair mask group. And I'm going to do that right now. I'm going to right click, duplicate group. And we'll just call this hair mask darker or whatever, it doesn't matter. I'm going to delete that hair mask layer for the group. And let's turn off my subject layer and the first hair mask layer that we created, or the first hair mask group. And I'm going to click on the layer mask of this second hair mask layer. Sorry, I know it's a little hard to follow, but I have two different groups, each with their own hair mask selection. I'm going to alt click on that. And again, with that layer mask selected, the thumbnail, we're going to press Control or Command L to bring up this levels. And we're just going to try and play with these sliders a bit to see if we can get that separation of the hair and the floor below it. We might not actually be able to get a perfect selection, but something like that should work. Okay, cool. I'm going to hit OK. Let's alt click to get out of that. And then clicking on that duplicated group, I'm going to press Alt and click on the layer mask. So now it's invisible. Let's turn our hair and our selection, our subject selection layers back on again. Let's go back down here. And then on that duplicated group's layer mask, making sure it's selected, I'm going to just go ahead and paint in white just to bring those parts back. Now, I'm not getting a very good result here, even with all those changes that I just made. So another thing that you could do, if you find yourself struggling to get a good selection of your hair, is to just do it manually. So what I mean by that is, let's say we want some of these hair strands, right? Let's just say some of these hair strands around this parts of the hair, we want that back because right now it looks just a little too jagged. And we're trying out all these different selection tools and we're just not getting a good key. Well, simply put, what we can do is I'm going to go ahead and delete that second group that we created. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new blank layer. And let's just call this hair strands. And then I'm going to press B for the brush tool. I'm going to right click and create something that's fairly hard, like 80-90%-ish. And then I'm just going to turn this brush size way down to like, I don't know, 2 pixels, something like that. And then pressing Alt or Option, I'm going to sample parts of the hair color, right? And then I'm simply just painting in hair strands manually. That's no special technique to it. It is a good idea, just so you can see some of this hair kind of goes over the image, to bring that hair strands layer underneath everything. And it looks like I accidentally created a second layer. So let's click on the hair strands layer, bring it below everything except for the background, and just start painting in hair strands. Oops, why do I keep doing that? Make sure you don't bring it into the layer mask. Okay, there we go. So the hair strands layer is underneath everything. Pressing Alt, and I'm just selecting different parts of the hair. Now, I think this brush is actually a little too hard, so I'm going to right click and turn the hardness down to like 20%, something that's a little bit softer. Just sampling different parts of the hair and start painting in hair strands. Now, the longer or the more time you spend on this, the better it's going to look, of course, and this also kind of boils down to how good you are at painting. I'm a terrible painter, as you can tell by these hair strands. They don't look good at all. But when you're zoomed out, something like this, you're not even going to notice how bad they are. So if you're having a bad time trying to make an automatic selection of hair, sometimes it just boils down to drawing in the hair strands manually. Sometimes that's what it takes. And you can be pretty rough with this, just as long as you don't really see the beginning of the hair starting in the air like that. Have it start inside the shape of the hair, and then it could end like that, because it could be a stray hair or something like that. And just be kind of rough with it, be kind of random with it. Hair kind of goes all over the place. It's hard to control it. So it's okay if it's a little messed up. And then if you don't like any of these, just get the eraser tool and erase away parts of the hair. Should be simple. Yeah. Okay, so at this point, I am pretty happy with the selection of my subject. So what I'm going to do is a little bit of house cleaning, aka organization. Let's go ahead and select our subject layers and let's group them, and we'll just call this subject. And I always say it is a good idea to stay organized, especially if you're building a complex project, because things can get very confusing very quickly. And also, before I move on, I'm going to duplicate that subject layer. Let's just bring it to the very bottom of everything. And then let's delete the layer mask, and we'll just call this backup. Just in case we accidentally do something to our original layer, we have this this backup for whatever reason. Okay, great. Cool. So let's turn off the solid color and the backup layers, and we should just have, at this point, our subject cut out on a blank background. And we want to save this with transparency so we could bring it inside of Blender or whatever 3D package of choice that you use. And we can use this as a background image to help align our scene and build our 3D environment. So inside of Photoshop, simply go up to File, Export, Export As. And then for our settings, I'm going to leave everything default, except I'm going to change the format to PNG, and then I'm going to make sure I have transparency checked. And then just because I'm using this as a preview inside of Blender, I don't need it the full resolution. I'm just going to change this to 1920 by 1080, just something small. It doesn't matter. It'll just make the viewport go a little bit quicker. Everything else should be standard. Convert to sRGB, that's okay. You don't really need to change anything else. Just make sure that transparency is selected, and if that box is invisible, it's because you probably have it set to JPEG or something else. So set it to PNG, or if TIFF is an option, that also supports transparency. And then just click on Export and find a location on your computer that you want to save this image to. Okay, cool. So before we move on, I'm going to go ahead and save this Photoshop project, and then I'm going to open up Blender. Okay, so here I am inside of Blender. I just have my default project startup loaded up, which has a human reference size object and just a couple of settings that I like to enable every time I start up Blender. So I just have my own default startup project loaded up. So that way I don't have to keep on doing the same options every time. If you want to know how I did that, check out my last video where I go over setting up Blender with the aim of creating CG backgrounds for photo composites. So I'm going to go inside of my camera, pressing 0 on the number pad, and then pressing home to expand it. And then I'm going to press N for the N panel. I'm going to View, View Lock, and I'm going to click on Camera to View. And this lets me move around inside of the camera, which, of course, positions my camera. If I don't have this checked and I try and move around, it's just going to pop me outside of the camera without moving my camera at all. So sometimes you want that. Sometimes you want to be able to move around without moving your actual 3D camera, because your 3D camera is what your Blender renders from. The image that you see, the 3D image that you save out of Blender, will come from the perspective of whatever your 3D camera is set up at. So I'm going to go inside of my camera. Click on the camera data properties. That's this little green icon down here. Okay, so before I do anything else inside of my 3D camera, what I want to do is I want to set the focal length of my 3D camera to match that, or as close as possible, to the real camera that I shot my original image with. Now, I didn't shoot this image, so I actually don't know what lens my friend used, but I can get that information because I know this image is a raw image, which saves that data. So inside of Lightroom, I'm going to find that image that I had, and then looking at here at the top right, I can see that it was shot at ISO 200 at 50 millimeters f3.5. Now, I don't really care about the other information right now. The f-stop is important sometimes if you want to match the depth of field, but what I'm really looking for is matching the focal length. So this was 50 millimeters, and I know my friend shot it with a full frame camera, so it is 50 millimeters equivalent, so no change. That's good to know. So inside of Blender, the camera is also a full frame equivalent unless you set it to otherwise. So I'm going to go ahead and change this to 50 millimeters, and now the focal length of my 3D camera should roughly match that of the focal length of the real life camera that the image was shot with. Now, with the object data properties of the camera still selected, I'm going to click on this checkbox for background images. I'm going to expand that, click on add image, and click on open. And I'm going to navigate to where I saved that image out of Photoshop with the transparent background. Okay, cool. Now I've loaded up that image, and as you can see, it's semi-transparent and it's behind everything. So to help me navigate and set up my camera a little bit better, I'm going to click on opacity 100% or change it all the way, and on the depth, I'm going to set it to front. Now here's a problem that you might run into, and you can see that the image, the background image that I loaded, is squished. It's kind of squished from the sides, and that's because the project resolution inside of Blender doesn't match the same resolution or the same aspect ratio as my original image. So inside of Photoshop, this image is set to a 16:9 aspect ratio. The resolution doesn't really matter. The aspect ratio is what matters. So this is a 16:9 aspect ratio, standard widescreen. So inside of Blender, I'm going to click on the output properties. That's this tab right here. I'm going to scroll up, and under resolution, I'm just going to change this to a resolution that I know is also 16:9. So that's typically 1920 by 1080. That's a 16:9 aspect ratio. Or if you want to do 4K, it's 3840 by 2160. This information is just something you can look online. Just look at common aspect ratios, look at 4K aspect ratios, whatever. Whatever the aspect ratio of your image is, typically it's going to be 3:2 or 16:9. Those are probably the two most common aspect ratios for photographs. Just look that up online and it'll kind of tell you what the resolution for that aspect ratio should be. So now it loads up perfectly fine. It looks correct to me. All I have to do now is match up the position and rotation of my 3D camera with that of my photograph, because I want to make sure that the perspective is perfectly or as close to matching. Now, I go over this pretty in depth in my last video on setting up a 3D camera to match perspectives, but I'm going to go over it briefly right now. So the main things when setting up and matching perspective inside of 3D is 1, matching the focal length of your camera, which we already did. We set the 3D camera to 50 millimeters. And the next thing we want to do is match the horizon line of our image. The horizon line is essentially the line across your screen of where the horizon would be if you were out in the middle of a field. Wherever you would see the sky meet the land, that's the horizon line. Every image has a horizon, you just might not be able to see it. Because this was shot in a studio, we don't really see the horizon line. And we don't really have indicators that help us either. We don't have boxes, we don't have buildings to see leading lines. So really we're just kind of stuck in a void here. We have no idea where the horizon line is in the image. But there are still indicators that you can use to help you determine that. So looking at this hand, I can see the top of it, right? But I can't see underneath it. And even if this person's leg wasn't here, I still wouldn't be able to see underneath the hand. So I can have a good guess that my camera in real space is somewhere above this point. Somewhere above this point, right? Because I can see on top of the hand here. I can also see on top of the subject's thighs, and I can see on top of the subject's arm, right? So I know I'm somewhere above this point. Now we want to find something in reference that's fairly straight onto the camera and not at any weird angles, and something that we intuitively know the tops and bottom of. So I'm going to use this head, for example. So we cannot see on top of her head. I mean, it's curved, so we can kind of see the top of her head. But if she had a dot directly on top of her head, we wouldn't really be able to see that. So based on analyzing those parts of our image, we can kind of assume that we are below the head of our subject and we are above the legs of our subject. And let's just keep those indicators here. We are somewhere living in this area. And intuitively, I can tell that we are probably in line more so with the bottom of this elbow with the camera. The camera is pretty much straight forward at the same height as the bottom of this elbow. So I'm going to assume that our horizon line lives probably around there. It might even be a little bit lower now that I think about it. Somewhere around there. Now again, this just comes with practice. Shooting in a studio environment, it's very difficult for a beginner to know where the horizon line is of an image, just because it's something that you develop over time. It's an eye that you develop. If you shoot outside a lot, or if you shoot where there's buildings with lots of leading lines, it's very easy to determine that vanishing point and in turn the horizon line of the image. For me, it's just intuitive. I just know by looking at this image, I instantly could tell that the horizon line is roughly around this point. So there's no cheat codes really to figuring that out. It might be difficult to figure that out in time, but if you took this image and you knew how tall you were or how the height of the camera in relation to everything else, you should be able to figure it out pretty simply. So that being said though, because I know the horizon line is roughly around here in the image, we want to match that horizon line inside of Photoshop, or sorry, inside of Blender. So here we are inside of Blender. I'm going to press N, making sure that we have camera view lock to is selected. And then I'm going to click on that human size reference that we have and just use that selected object to pivot around. So I'm going to just start moving the subject around so it looks like they're on the ground. And then what I'm also looking for is matching the size of our human reference to the size of our background image. That way I know that our subject or our scene is centered around roughly the same part of where our scene would be in real life. So obviously our human reference here is standing up. So what I can first do is I can match the size of their torsos. So I'm looking at the waist of my subject with the shoulders of the waist and shoulders of my subject with the waist and shoulders of my 3D model here. And we're just going to try and match the size of that roughly. And we can also use the size of the head as well. So that looks pretty close to me. Like they look roughly the same scale, right? The head and the size of the torso is pretty close, and it doesn't have to be perfect. So now I want to match the height. So she's on the ground, right? So we want to go down to the ground. Now we are roughly in the right position in 3D space for our camera, but we still haven't set up that matching horizon line. So it's kind of hard to tell where the background meets the floor because there's nothing there. So let's just press Shift A to create a mesh, and we're going to click on plane, and that just creates a 2D plane. I'm going to press S for scale and type in something crazy high like 10,000. 1, 2, 3, cool, and hit enter. If I get out of my camera, I can now see that I've created a plane that is scaled up 10,000 times, and it basically goes for infinity. Not really, but it goes for a big distance, far enough to know where the horizon line's at. So now I'm going to go back into my camera, and this point where the ground meets the sky is the horizon line. And what we said before inside of Photoshop is that horizon line is roughly around this point, probably closer to something around here. So we want to match that same horizon line in Blender. So without moving my camera at all, I'm going to click on my camera in the outliner up here at the top right so it's selected. And then I can press R, and what I could do is I can rotate. And whenever you press R for rotate, it's going to do so whatever object you have selected, in this case it's the camera, it's going to rotate it perpendicular to the view that you're currently at. So if I get out of the camera view and I click on this person, if I press R, it's going to rotate it perpendicular to the view that I'm currently at. If I look at it from the side and press R, now it rotates it from this view, perpendicular to this view. So going back to my camera, select my camera. I don't want to rotate it like this because it's fairly straightforward. But if I double tap R, it enables trackball mode, which just basically lets you pivot around the object's origin. So it's a little hard to move around. So after I double tapped R, I'm going to hold Shift, and that lets me do small, minute movements. And again, I want to match that horizon line that's kind of going through the lower torso of my subject. So I'm simply just going to line up the horizon line with that horizon line that I established inside of Photoshop, probably somewhere around there. And at this point, the perspective is set up correctly. The perspective and the focal length are set up more or less perfectly. But I can tell that my subject is still too high in the air, which could work if my subject was on a box or something, right? But they're on the ground. So what we have to do, what we know by this is that the camera's too high up. So holding Shift and middle click, I'm just going to bring the camera down here. And then something like that should look good. I think the horizon line might be a little too high just because I'm looking at the feet of this 3D model. And it just doesn't look at the right angle. So I'm going to click on the camera again, double tap R, hold Shift to do smaller movements, and I'm going to do something similar to this, maybe closer to this. I'm going to bring this up higher. There we go. Something around this looks pretty good. And I'm just going to go ahead and center my camera on that 3D model. Oops, I messed up my perspective line, so let's readjust that. Okay, cool. Great. So now we have our camera set up in 3D space. It's more or less correct in terms of perspective, and the focal length matches. Now we are ready to start building our scene. So for this edit, in my mind, I wanted to have my character inside of a dark void, something that just kind of goes forever in all directions. And then around my subject, I imagined having like just a bunch of bullets, just a bunch of empty and used and unused bullet shells surrounding my subject, like basically scattered forever in all directions. Like she's just sitting inside of an endless void of bullets all over the place. And then I was also thinking that like it'd be cool if I had maybe her rocket launcher, because this character is from Arcane, so it's a good idea to have a good idea of the subject matter whenever you're doing edits like this. Kind of research the background of the character you're shooting, if it is an original character and not something, or if it is a pre-existing character and not just a cool design or a cool fashion photo or whatever. In this case, this is Jinx from Arcane, and what I wanted is to have them kind of sitting in this sea of bullets with like their weapons on the ground, maybe like the machine gun here in the bottom right or something like that. So again, this is my basic idea for this image before I start building it inside of 3D. So now that I have a decent idea of how I'm going, or what my background is going to be, I need to start constructing it. So I'm going to just delete this plane for now because we don't need this. I'll keep the human size reference object here just as a focal point for building up my scene. So again, like I said, in my head, this character is in like an endless void that just kind of goes off in all directions. There's no buildings or anything like that. So I want to create a 3D environment that reflects that. So I'm going to make a mesh plane, and I'm basically going to create a giant seamless backdrop, like, you know, those rollout papers, or basically something that looks like the original image, but just way farther away and infinitely scaled up in all directions. So I probably could have kept that original plane that I had, but I'm just going to go ahead and just scale this way up. Something like this. And I'm going to press G for grab, Y to move it on the Y axis over here, because I don't care about anything behind the camera. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to tab into edit mode. So with this plane selected, I'm going to press tab, and then I'm going to click on the edge selection tool up here, and I'm going to click on that edge back here. And I'm going to press E for extrude and press Z to align it to the Z axis going straight up. Something like that. And so now we have what looks like a paper backdrop, but we want like a smooth gradient fall off between the ground and the wall, back wall, I guess. So I'm going to click on this plane right here, and I'm going to press Control B or Command B on a Mac to bevel. And then when I move my mouse, you can see it bevels that edge. If I use the scroll wheel up, it creates more subdivisions on that bevel, making it smoother. So I'm just going to do something like this. Whoa. If your mouse goes off your screen, you might get something that looks like that. Just hit cancel or right click and do that again. Something like that. Yeah, that looks cool. Awesome. I'm going to tab out, and you might see these like shading artifacts, these lines right here. If you get that, just right click the object and click on shade smooth. And now that has a nice smooth shading. I'm going to go back into my camera view, and it's kind of hard to tell, but the back of this plane, let's name this 3D object backdrop. We actually can't see the back of it at all. You can see that it just kind of cuts off, and that's because the visible distance of our camera is lower than how far away our object's at. So if you click on the camera object and go to the camera object properties down here, the data properties, that's that green icon, we can see the clip start and clip end. That means this clip end means anything that's 100 meters or further away gets clipped off. It's just invisible. So let's just set that something to like, I don't know, 1,000? Sure. Cool. And boom. Now we can see the back of our giant seamless wall. And what we're looking here is to create something that fills up our whole frame. So if I scale this down, or if I scale this on the x-axis, we can see here, if it looked like this would be too thin because we can see the borders of it on our subject. So if it looked like this, I would just press S for scale, press X for the x-axis, and just move it up so that the borders of our backdrop are no longer within the bounds of our 3D camera view. And then because I did some scaling and moving around outside of edit mode, I want to make sure that the scale of our object is normalized. So I'm just going to press Control A for apply, and I'm going to apply the scale of our 3D backdrop. This is just important to do if you're making physics simulations and whatnot, which we are going to do later, and I'll show you why. So cool, we have a seamless backdrop that goes forever. Now we need to texture it. So I'm going to go back into object mode, and before we actually start texturing everything, I want to get my lighting set up, at least a starting point with my lighting. So while I'm in my camera view, I'm going to go ahead and turn off my human reference for now. And I'm going to click on this top right button, and these are my different viewport shading modes. And this far right one is the render mode. If I click on that, it's going to look black because there's no lights in my scene. And if I click on the world icon tab, that's this red icon right here, you can see the background of my world is set to this gray color, but the strength of it is set to 0. If I turn this up, all of a sudden the brightness turns up. And just to see better what's going on, if I click on that human reference again, we can see here they're just being lit from all directions because it's just the big endless void of gray all around. Now, right now, you see transparent everywhere. If you want to see that world environment, just click on the render tabs up here, the render properties tab, scroll all the way down to the film, open this film tab up, and then uncheck transparent. Or if you want it transparent, click it to be transparent. So you can see here we have just a big gray world everywhere. I want that transparent for now. So I'm going to go back into camera view. I'm going to turn off my world strength for now. And I want to try and match the lighting of my original photograph, at least a little bit. So I'm going to press Control A, or Shift A, sorry. I'm going to press Shift A to bring up the Add menu. You can also access it at the top of your screen. And I'm going to add a light. And just for starting, I'm going to click on Point Light. And if I press G and start moving that around, you can see I have a light in my scene. Now, looking back at my original subject, or my original photograph, I want to have a good understanding of the lighting that's going on in this scene. Now, because I didn't take this photo, I don't actually know exactly the lighting setup that the photographer used. And because this photograph has so many different colors of lighting, it might be actually very difficult to kind of really break down and understand what is happening here. But also, because it has so many different sources of lighting on the subject, it means that you could have a little bit more liberty with placements of your lights, because as a viewer of the image, of the final image, as long as the colors and the direction kind of matches the original photograph, no one will see anything that stands out. If I have a big orange light in my 3D scene right here, then yeah, people are going to look at the image and go, that doesn't make any sense to me because there's no big orange light that's hitting the subject. So looking at this, I see 4 main light sources that are hitting my subject. I obviously see the green, right? You can see the green that's on the subject that's hitting the chest, the left side of the arm, and the face here. And because it's not hitting anywhere else, we can see a little bit hitting the top of the hand here. I can assume that we have a green light source somewhere off camera that's kind of aimed like this. It's probably a spotlight or a softbox. I'm not exactly sure, but I do know that there is a green light somewhere around here, kind of aimed at that way, and it's hitting our subject in a very small spot. We'll leave this on for now. And then I know that I can see all this magenta lighting that's hitting the back of my subject, the back of the neck, a little bit of the face here, and you can see down here it's not really hitting the foot at all. It kind of falls off a little bit, but the brightest parts of it is definitely centered around here. So I can assume that there is a magenta light somewhere off camera, aimed at the back of our subject, like that. Probably. Again, I don't know if it's a softbox or what, but I just know that there's probably a pink light there and a green light there. Now, what are the other two sources of lights that I see? I'm going to turn these off for now. You can see on the back shoulder of my subject here, they're lit up with something that's neutral colored. It's like a nice white light. It's not colored it's not gelled any color, because this looks like normal skin tone to me, right? It doesn't have any weird green or purple colors to it. So there's a nice neutral color lighting that's hitting my subject somewhere at the top. And it's hitting more of their back shoulder here, and a little bit of it is hitting the arm here, but not as much because there's still a lot of color on it. So we can see a little bit of normal color here, or white light there. Probably a little bit of white light there. And you can see the top of their leg here and the top of their hand here. It doesn't have a very strong color to it. So a little bit of that white lighting is probably also hitting some of this. And it's probably a big soft light, because I don't see any crazy shadows being cast by that neutral white light. So I can assume that there is probably a big white softbox behind my subject and above the camera, kind of shooting a white light somewhere, something like that, right? So far we have designated these three light sources: a big neutral colored white source, a green light coming from camera left, and a purple light coming from camera right. And then if you can see here in the reflection of the front of our boots, we can see a blue light source. And we can also kind of see like this soft blue. Let me turn these other ones off and set this color to blue. We can see kind of a soft blue light source hitting this part of our image. We'd also see in the shadows of this arm here, it's a little blue. Those are the best, and like a little bit of the shadows of our subject here, we can see some blue. Obviously the hair is blue, so you know, it's going to be kind of hard to notice what color is actually hitting the hair if you go by that. But humans are good at knowing the color of skin usually. And so I can tell that this color skin has a bluish tint to it, and that the person's skin is not blue. So based off these indicators of blue lighting hitting my subject, I can assume that there is a blue light source hitting my subject somewhere from this direction. And looking at my photo, I can see a light panel right here. I think this is a light panel. I'm not 100% sure. So I could probably safely assume that this is a blue LED panel on the ground, shooting up a very, very low strength but soft blue light source. So we have these four main light sources in our subject, or in our original photograph. When we are making our 3D environment, it is a good idea to keep these factors in mind. When we build a scene, we want to make sure that any 3D objects that are in the immediate vicinity around our subject, so anything that's on the ground in 3D, has a similar lighting on it as our model does. It doesn't matter if there's buildings in the background. In this case, there's not going to be buildings, but if there were buildings in my 3D scene far off in the background, those don't have to match this lighting at all, because those buildings could have a totally different lighting far away. Even if it's overcast, right? And this is outside. For all we know, that there's clouds everywhere, and there might be a patch of clouds far away that's opened up and letting the sun beam through. So you don't always have to match the lighting of your 3D scene as a whole, but it is a good idea to match the 3D lighting of whatever's around where your subject is going to be in 3D space, if that makes any sense. So let's go back into Blender, and I'm going to try and roughly match those four light sources, or at least the main ones. We could probably get away with not having that white light source, maybe, because the predominant ones we see here are the blue, the green, the magenta, and the blue, and a little bit of the white, maybe just to balance things out. So I'm going to, let's start off with the green light first. So real quick, I don't want to move my camera at all, because I already have it in place. It's in a good spot for now. I'm going to click on my camera, and just to make sure that I don't accidentally move it, I'm going to click on the object properties right here. That's this orange icon. And with the camera selected, I'm going to click these little lock boxes, or these padlocks, next to the location, rotation, and scale. And this just makes it so I don't accidentally move it or rotate it or scale it. Even if I try and move it inside of the view, nothing happens. But now if you see me moving, I can't move around my subject because I'm in the camera. So I want to make sure I get out of my camera if I want to move around at all. Right? So now I can move around outside of my camera, and when I'm in my camera, I can't move at all. That's good. We don't want to accidentally move our camera, at least not now. We might want to make adjustments later, but for now, let's keep it in place. So let's click on our first light, and let's just put this in a collection called lights. And we are going to set this to a nice green color. And what we can do is, well, first off, let's press N and uncheck this camera to view lock button. And that means we can zoom in and zoom out. And what we're doing is we're not zooming in and zooming out of the camera. We're just zooming in and zooming out on our view, right? The camera's still staying in the same spot. We're just zooming in and zooming out on what we can see. So with that first light that we selected, if we click on this green light bulb icon down here, we're going to see the properties for this light. We can click on the color, and I'm going to just click on the eyedropper, and I'm going to select something on my subject that's white, or that originally was white but is now different colored. So I'm thinking this this part of my subject's outfit was probably white, so I'm just going to eyedropper that to sample the color of the lighting. Now it's too dark, so I'm going to click on the color and bring this back up to full power or full value, and I'm going to zoom out, and then I can adjust the power of the light using this power slider. So I'm going to just start moving this around in a spot that roughly matches. What I'm going to do is I'm also going to bring my 3D object down here so it's roughly in the same spot too. And that'll just kind of help us make sure that we're putting the light in the right spot. So something else to note is this green light that's hitting our subject. As I said before, it's only hitting this upper portion of our subject, right? We don't see any of that major green light on the ground. We can see a little bit of bounce light because they're on a white backdrop, but the direct light beams are really only hitting kind of the top of my subject here, which means it's probably a spotlight, or what we would call a spotlight in Blender. So with that point light selected, we're going to click over here and click on spot, and now it's a spotlight. And what I can do is I can rotate this and aim this to hit that part of my subject that I want. I'm going to turn off my overlays for a second so it hides that background image. And I'm just going to try and, I'm pressing R with the light still selected to just move things around so it's only hitting that part of my 3D model, because that's a good representation of my real subject. I'm going to turn this back on. And another thing I want to do is I want to take notice of the size of the light. So if I go back to my Photoshop document, oops, if I zoom in here, the shadow that's being cast by this green light is not super sharp. It's not very soft, but it's also not super sharp. And there's also a very soft fall off. The beams of light that's hitting the subject, where those beams end is not very visible. We can't just see where it's green and then all of a sudden not green. It kind of falls off. So what we can do is let's just turn off our camera for a second, and that just hides the background image while keeping all the other overlays still on. Let's click on the point light, and if we click on the beam shape, that's the size of the spotlight, how wide it is. And then the blend is the softness of the edges. So if I turn this blend up, you can see the softness of that spotlight is softer. If I turn it all the way down, hard edge. If I turn it all the way up, it's softer. But that's not the size of the light. That's just the fall off. But if I look at the shadows being cast, the shadows are perfectly sharp, which means this light source is very small. And if we look at the radius, we can see that it's 0. So it's infinitely small. If I turn this up, you can see the size of the light is getting bigger. And when lights get bigger, so do the softness of the shadows. The shadows become softer. So we can look at the finger shadows right here on the ground and try and match the softness values of the finger shadows that we see right here. And that'll get the general size of the 3D light to match the size of the real life light. So that's looking pretty close. Yeah, something like that's good enough. Cool. So now we have a light that's kind of in the right position. It's the right size, and it has a nice soft fall off. But I'm going to adjust the spot so it's mostly only hitting that part of my subject. Cool. Now we have the first light set up. We can adjust it later, but that's a good starting point. We can also turn up the brightness a bit. So let's call this green spot. Now what I'm going to do with that green spot, I'm going to press Shift and D to duplicate it. If I move my mouse, we're now moving a copy of that green spotlight. And we're going to name this one magenta spot. And as you might have guessed, with this magenta spotlight selected, I'm going to click on the color, and I'm going to give it that kind of pink color that we saw over here. So let's turn off the green light for now inside of 3D, and then let's start rotating this spotlight around so it hits our subject in the same way that the spotlight or the magenta light is hitting our subject in the photo. So it's fairly soft. We don't see any super hard shadows from the purple light. It's kind of a soft shadow, and it has a big fall off, or a soft fall off. We don't see it hit the ground here. We don't see it hit the back of the head too much. So it's centered around this part of our subject. It's centered around here, and it has a soft fall off. So let's aim for replicating that. We can also tell that because the light is hitting this part of the arm here, which is closer to the camera, this purple light is also closer to the photographic camera than the green light. The green light is probably a little bit farther back behind our subject because we can see all these shadows right here. We don't the side of our face, of our subject's face, is not green, only the front and top of it. So we can assume this green light was farther back behind our subject and to the camera left. But the magenta one is a little bit closer to the camera and camera right. So we can take this, press G and Shift Z to move it everywhere except for the Z axis. Or I can just press G and press Y to move it towards me a little bit. You could also get out of your camera and just press G and move it like this. So here's the side of our subject, right? And I think it's a little bit in front of them, like this. And I'm pressing R to rotate, or double tap R to trackball rotate to aim that around. I'm going to do that back from my camera view. So just aiming this around. I want it to not hit so much of the ground and the head directly, but just mostly on the body. So I'm going to turn that spot size down and just kind of aim so it matches what we see here in our image. I think it could be a little brighter. Something like that looks pretty good. And maybe I'll move it a little bit farther away. Okay, cool. So that's looking pretty good for the magenta light. So if we turn both of those lights on together, we can see here we have a pretty decent representation of the green light and the purple light, or the pink light. Those look pretty close to this here. But it looks far too dark of an image, right? Way too dark. And the reason for that is, if you're looking at the backdrop here, we have tons of ambient lighting everywhere, right? Well, let's get the blue light first. Let's get that blue light put into place. So I'm going to create another duplicate of this magenta light. Shift D to duplicate, and we're going to call this blue spot. As you might have guessed, I'm going to change it to a blue color. And then I'm going to put this in the same position as this blue light in camera. So it's on the ground and it's close to the camera and it's facing our subject. So I'm going to get out of my camera view. I'm going to click on that blue spotlight and I'm just going to bring it all the way over here on the ground. Where's my camera at? So my camera's right here, right? So I'm going to bring it on the ground in front of the camera. And I'm going to press 0 to go back into my camera view. You can see here it is. I think it's a little too big. Let's make it a little bit smaller. Put it on the ground. Now, you might think that this is your whole camera view, but if you remember, it's not locked to camera anymore. So if I zoom out and zoom in, you can see more and less of the image, and that might confuse you with what actually is your frame. So if you don't want to have that confusion, click on your camera, and then at the object properties or the data properties for your camera, scroll down to viewport display, open this up, and then this little option, pass part out, I'm not really sure how to say that, just turn that all the way to 1. And that just makes it black around the borders of the camera. So now there's no confusion about what your actual view of the camera is. So going back to that blue spotlight, we're going to bring that closer to our subject. Bring it over here in the ground. So now it's kind of in the same spot as our blue spotlight in this image. And we are just going to double tap R to kind of aim it towards our subject on the ground. And again, I'm going to hide my camera for now, just so I can kind of see what's going on here. Okay, so this looks like it's aimed kind of at the same spot as the lighting down here, except it's way too strong. This is a very, very soft light. It's not, there's no hard blue shadows or anything like that. It's just a very soft blue spotlight. So I'm going to turn up the spot size of this a little bit, and I'm going to turn the power way down. In fact, I'm just going to bring it down to 0, and then I'm just going to turn it up a little bit. Just a little bit. So now we can see here we have a little bit of blue on the front part of our shadows. I'm going to make the spot size a little bit bigger, and then maybe bring this up a bit higher. And I don't want so much blue light hitting the ground here, so I'm just going to double tap R to kind of mess with the rotation of this blue light, so it's aimed up a little bit higher. And then, yeah, something like that looks pretty good. So now we have that blue, nice blue light coming from the front right part of our frame. But again, it's way too dark. And look at the ground. If we're looking at the ground here, the ground around our, whoops. If you get all turned around inside of 3D space and you're like, oh, where am I looking? I don't know. Just click on something that you do know the location of in your frame or in your scene. And I'm going to click on the human reference. And then with your mouse in the viewport, just press the period key on your number pad. If you don't have a number pad, just go up to View and click on Frame Selected. And that just zooms your viewport camera to, or your viewport view on that object. So if we look at the ground all around our subject, we have correct lighting, right? We have the correct direct lighting that's hitting our scene or our subject. But the ground is still pitch black everywhere. That's because our ambient lighting has not been set up yet. So our ambient lighting is basically bounce lighting. It's not anything in your scene that's not being directly lit by a light source, but has lighting, is being lit by ambient lighting. All the lights that bounce around in your room everywhere, all that lighting just bounces all over the place that raises the general brightness of that room. And that's called room tone for lighting, or ambiance, or ambient lighting. We have none of that because this room is infinitely big and we have no bounce lighting anywhere. We have nothing going on anywhere. If I put the subject inside of a small cube, and let's just scale this cube up to the size a little bit bigger than our camera. Oops. Let's just scale this up a bit. And I go back to my camera view. Let me scale up a little bit more. There we go. So we're now inside of that cube, right? Now that we're in a smaller world, because we're inside of that cube I just created, we can see more bounce lighting happening, but it's not enough. So what we need to do, we're going to delete that camera, or we're going to delete that cube. What we're going to do is we're going to go to our object world properties, and we're going to set the color of this. If I turn my camera back on, actually, we're not going to turn that camera back on. We don't need that for now. We're going to look at our Photoshop document, or our original image. We can see the white backdrop here is not being lit by any direct light source, right? We can kind of see like a little bit of green on the edges here, a little bit of magenta and blues, and a little bit of white down here. But we can see, like, yeah, the ground here, anywhere that's not being lit by like a direct light source, this is like the general ambient lighting of the scene, which means that the world essentially is that color. So we should set it to something like that. which is kind of like a desaturated bluish tone. So if I go to the color of our world, I'm going to set that to full brightness and just go. I'm going to select like a bluish purpley lavender tone. And it's still black because the strength is set to 0. I'm going to set the strength to 1 for now. And now we have a very bright room that looks a little bit more like our original photograph. If I turn the strength of this down, I can start balancing out the contrast ratios between our ambient lighting and our direct light source. We want something that roughly matches on our subject, roughly matches our photograph. So again, we're not looking at the background. We're not looking at anything that's far away from the camera in 3D space. Just the general lighting around our subject. What does the ambient and direct lighting look like on our subject? And does that match the ambient and direct lighting of our 3D scene? And more specifically, our subject in 3D space, our focal point. So that's looking pretty close. I think if I compare the two, this is a little bit less saturated and a little bit brighter, maybe. So I'm just going to turn the color of our background. We're just going to take the saturation down a little bit. And that's looking pretty close. I could probably turn up the blue light a little bit more. So I'm going to click on that blue spotlight, go back to the light properties and turn the brightness up a little bit to a little bit more blue. And that's looking pretty close. If I go into camera view, this looks pretty close to what's already here. We can see if I click on the camera tab and I go to the background images, I can actually offset this to the left and right just temporarily. And we can see here that the lighting on our 3D model, which is our reference, is pretty similar to the lighting that's on our real life photograph. And that is close enough for what we need, because we're not trying to recreate the lighting on her exactly. We're just trying to recreate the general lighting for our 3D objects that we're going to place into the scene. Okay, so like I said before, I want to create like a sea of bullets and bullet shells and casings and whatnot that's just surrounding my subject in 3D space. I want them to just be like in like kind of a never-ending sea of bullets. Just doesn't really make sense at all, but I think it will look cool in the end. So I could 3D model a bullet in a bullet case myself, or I could use something for free and change it up. So as a reference, if you look up Arcane, Jinx from Arcane, bullets, whatever, I see a lot of these designs where the slug of the bullet is like this clear blue, clear greenish glass looking material, which is obviously the Hextech crystal, I'm assuming. So I think I can create something like that in 3D fairly simply by just changing the materials. So I'm going to use this bullet that I found, made by this person for free on Sketchfab. So thank you to them for allowing this to be used for free as a starting point. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on Download 3D Model, and then available downloads is FBX original format. FBX should be fine. So I'm going to click on Download and download it to my computer. Before I bring this bullet into this project file, I'm going to set up the bullet in another Blender project file. I always like to set up, whenever I'm downloading materials or 3D models off the internet, I like to reconnect all the textures and everything in a separate Blender file and then just copy and paste it into my working project that is my main background. Just because things can get very confusing and you don't really know how the person made the 3D model, and when you bring it into Blender, there might be a billion different 3D models, parts put together. So open up Blender again on your computer. I'm going to delete everything from here. So I just have an empty Blender project, and I'm actually going to just drag that bullet FBX into my scene. Just hit import FBX. Great. Press period to zoom in on that, and here we go. We can see this. Now I'm going to click on this second from the right viewport shading icon, which is just the material preview, and this lets me preview the materials as I build them. It's not going to be 100% accurate representation of the material, but it'll be good enough to start building it. This might take a second also at first, because it has to compile all the shaders and think about all the different textures that are connected to this. So if you first go to render view or material preview and it takes a while, just give it a second. Okay, cool. So it's done loading, but obviously none of the textures loaded up. If I click on this 3D bullet file, and I click on the material properties down here, we can see it has a bullet material, but obviously nothing is loaded up. So I'm going to click on the bottom right of this window, and you're going to see this little cursor icon appear. I'm just going to create a new window, and I'm going to change this window. If you click on this icon up here, this drop down, I'm going to change it to the shader editor. I'm going to press N to hide this end panel because we don't need it. And here's what our bullet material looks like, which is nothing basically. There's nothing connected to this. So I'm going to delete this for now. And then make sure that you have the Node Wrangler add-on enabled, which you can figure out how to do in my last project or my last video. But with the Node Wrangler enabled, click on the Principal BDSF node right here, and pressing Control-Shift-T or Command-Shift-T on a Mac, it's going to bring up this window. Just navigate to where you downloaded that bullet, and then just navigate to where the textures are for that bullet, and we can see base color, metallic, normal, and roughness. We want those maps, so just select all of those and click on the Principal Texture Setup button down here, and then give it a second. Let it think for a bit. You could also drag these in one at a time, but if you have the Node Wrangler set up, it just does it for you. And for some reason, I didn't click on the right. I don't know what just happened. I'm going to redo that again. Control-Shift-T, textures, click on all these, hit setup. There we go. Okay, it did it right this time. And so you can see by using the Node Wrangler, it automatically selects all of those textures that you just loaded up. These are the base color, metallic, roughness, and normal maps. It automatically connects the normal map to a normal map node. They go in the correct sockets, and it also sets it up with the proper texture coordinates. That's the mapping of the texture where it goes on the 3D model. And with all of that, we can see we have the bullet properly loaded up. Now, as I said before, I want to change this bullet, the tip of this bullet, to something that's kind of a clear purple, or a clear blue, right? Kind of a glass color. So there's a couple things I have to do first. So first and foremost, we can see here, if I press G, it's just one object. I can't click on any part of this. The slug and the casing for this bullet are all one object. So if I tab into edit mode, you can see here, if I click on these vertices and press G, it's all one thing. If I press Control L to select linked vertices, we can actually see that when they made this, they made it with more than one object. So that's going to help us out a lot. So if this was not two separate objects, then we'd have to do a lot more work, but we lucked out, and these are actually two different objects, but they're combined into one object. So what we need to do is separate these two. So with the selection, since we have the whole slug selected, I'm just pressing right click to cancel out what I'm moving around. So I'm just moving around, pressing G to move, and right click to cancel, just to make sure that the whole thing's selected. With the whole slug selected, I'm going to press I'm going to press P for separate, and I want to separate by selection because I have the slug selected and nothing else. P, separate by selection. Now if I tab out of edit mode and I'm back into object mode, you can see up here it says object mode. We now have two different objects. We have the casing and we have the slug. Now we don't really need to move them at all, not now at least. But what I do want to do is I want to create two versions of this. One that's the bullet as a whole, because I want to scatter unfired bullets all over the place, but I also want to have scattered shells, just the casing, all over the place, just these. So I'm going to create a duplicate of this. I'm just going to bring this up there for now. We're going to call this bullet underscore casing. And then I'm going to click. I'm not going to join these yet, but I am going to give them unique materials. Okay, so back to my original concept, right? I want the slug of this bullet to be a kind of a clear glass, bluish clear glass material, right? The issue with that is if I change this material at all, let's just add a hue saturation node, and let's just bring that into the base color. So we just have the base color of this material going into a hue and saturation node, right? If I change this at all, let's just say if I change the hue, around and I turn the saturation way up, I could change the value of this hue saturation node. If I change that, it does that for the whole material. I don't want that done. I don't want any changes that I do in the material to do it everywhere. I only want the changes that happen on this material right here. So I'm going to go ahead and get rid of that. And what we want to do is create a copy of the material as well. So we can go ahead and click on this material, and we'll name this material bullet casing, right? So all the objects so far are going to have that bullet casing material. Now I want to click on the slug. I'm going to click on this little icon, which looks like 2 stacked papers. I'm going to click on that. And what that does is it duplicates the material into a new instance. So it's a separate material now. It's the same thing, it's duplicated, but it's not connected. So if I make any changes to this one, you can see here the changes are only made to this material and not this material. So I'm going to name this, so clicking on the slug again, we have this slug selected, which has this new material. I'm going to call this bullet slug. So now we have 2 materials. We have the shells, or the casings, which has the bullet material called bullet casing, and then we have the slug here, which has the bullet material called bullet slug. This is what we want to change to a glass texture. So I'm going to keep these maps here for now, but I'm going to delete this principal BDSF. So I'm going to click on that and click delete. And it's going to turn black because there's nothing there. What I'm going to do is I'm going to press Shift A, I'm going to shader, and I'm going to add a glass shader. And then we're going to feed this glass shader into the surface of our material output and give it a second to think and recompile all these shaders. It's going to take a second. And here we go. Now we have a glass material on this bullet. But we still want to maintain some of the details, like the scratches and the roughness of our original bullet slug. So we can have this normal map, which is just extra 3D details. We can feed the output of this normal map node into the normal of our glass, which doesn't do much. And we can also feed the roughness of our original bullet material, feed the color of that into the roughness of our glass. And so now if I zoom in on here, you can see, now it's clipping because I'm getting too close. So if you have this issue where you're getting close to your subject and it's clipping, press N to open up the N panel and click on the view and just turn that clip start to something lower than 0.01. I'm just put all zeros. There we go. Okay, so you can see here we have all those nice scratches on the slug of our bullet. But I think it's a little too scratched. I want it a little bit clearer. So with the Node Wrangler enabled, if I press Control Shift and click on the roughness map, this is what our roughness map looks like. Anything that's white is pure rough. Anything that's black is 0 roughness. But we want, what we can see here is there's nothing that's pure glossy or 0% roughness. So let's go ahead and Control Shift T back onto the glass BDSF node. So this is what our material looks like. I want to press Shift A, type in search, and I'm going to add a color ramp. It's converter color ramp. I'm going to add that to our roughness map. So we have this roughness, this color ramp right here, and it's going to do nothing. But if we move these sliders in, we can change the contrast of that roughness map. And so now, if we preview this color ramp, Control Shift T, we can see what we're doing is when we're bringing in these sliders, we're just adding contrast to that roughness map, which is what we want. So I'm going to press Control Shift T again on the glass BDSF, and I just want some of these scratched up areas to be rough, and I want most of it to be kind of a very smooth glass, something like that. Great, that's looking good. And then the color, right? We want this to be kind of a bluish green to match this reference. So I'm going to click on the color of this glass BDSF and change it to a bluish green. Something like that looks pretty cool. Perfect. Cool. Now we have created the slug of our bullet, which is this bluish green glass material. We have the roughness on there, and we retain that roughness map from our original material. These ones aren't being used anymore, so we can, if we want to, we could delete these two because they're not being used. We're only using the normal map and the roughness map of our original texture. Cool. Great. So where are we at now? We have a bullet casing, and we have a full unspent bullet. What I want to do is I actually want to join these two materials, or these two objects together, because we're going to be scattering these as one object. So I'm going to click on the bullet slug, and then let's just name that slug on here. Actually, it won't really matter because we're combining them first. So let's click on the slug, shift click on the casing, and press Control J to merge those two objects into one object. And let's just name this bullet full. Cool. So now we have two objects, the full unspent bullet, which still has the slug, and then we have this bullet casing. Now, bullet casings are hollow, right? So I think if we click on this bullet casing object and tab into edit mode, I'm going to press 3, or I can click up here at the top for face selection mode. I'm going to click on these faces, and let's see what happens when I delete these faces. Okay, cool. That looks a little bit more like a hollowed out bullet. Awesome. Great, that's what I want. Actually, I want to get rid of these ones too, along the inside. Cool. Yeah, that's looking good. Great. Now I have my two objects. So I could click on these two objects, Control C to copy objects, and go back into my original Blender file, and with the bullet selection, the bullet collection selected, I can press Control V. If I zoom in on these, now we have these two bullets in our scene, which is cool and all, but I said I wanted a bunch, right? I wanted them scattered everywhere. So let me first click on these two bullets and press G to move them around. And you can see here, they're down here. Now these bullets are actually way too small, because if you look at a reference file or a reference image of Jinx, you can see the bullets that are on her bullet belt are fairly large. They're not like standard 9mm size bullets. Yeah, they're a bit bigger, especially if you look at some video game art. You can see the bullets here on her bullet belt are fairly large, like the size of fingers or bigger. So I want to try and reflect that with what we're doing here in 3D space. So I'm going to just click on these two objects, click on these two bullets, and just scale them up. And let's zoom out real quick. Let's bring in our human reference, so we have something to reference the size of. Bring these bullets over here. And yeah. These look pretty good. Now, what I am going to do is, though, is I think I want to make the slug of this bullet. You know what? Let's delete these for now. Let's go back into the other Blender project file where I have these two bullets. So I want to make the slug of this bullet a little bit more pointed, a little sharper. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into edit mode of this bullet with the point or vertex selection or vertice selection. I'm going to click on this one vertice right here. I'm going to go back to front view, pressing 1 in the number pad. And if I press G and X, I can move this one vertice by itself. What I'm going to do is I'm going to click at the top of my screen here, and this is proportional editing. If I click on that, and then I press G and X to move on the X-axis, you can see it looks like it's moving the whole bullet. But if I scroll wheel in and out, you can see the circle of influence. And this circle of influence determines how much around that original selection is also getting selected. So if I zoom in on here, press G and X, you can see here I'm just selecting more and less of a selection around that one vertice. So like I said, I want this be a little bit more pointed, so I'm going to press G, X, and maybe something like that. Yeah, and let's just squish this in a bit more, so I'm going to press G and X. Yeah, something like that looks pretty cool. I actually want it a little bit sharper, so I'm going to go back into edit mode, and then I'm going to, whoops, it got all turned around here. Let's go back onto that bullet. Here we go. Edit mode. If I alt-click on this ring of vertices, it'll select all of them. And I'm just going to press S to scale, and I'm just going to adjust it a bit so it's a little bit sharper. Okay, so we could, now that we have our bullet set up, we have our material set up how we want it to be, or how I want it to be, and I've adjusted the shape of the slug a little bit just so it's a little bit sharper. And actually, I'm guessing we want to make the size of these bullets a little bit bigger. If we look at the reference of Jinx, in a lot of the art, the bullets are a lot bigger than just standard 9mm bullets. They're like the size of fingers or bigger. So I'm just going to scale these up a little bit. And we can always adjust the scale of this later. So now that I've done that, I'm going to press Control A and apply this scale. And then now what I want to do is, I want to have like a sea of bullets, right? And of course, you know, I could go into the top view and duplicate, rotate, grab all these, duplicate, rotate, and just do that over and over again. But not only is scattering these bullets one at a time going to take a very, very long time, but it's also going to look very artificial, like hand placed. I want it to feel organic, like there's piles of bullets here and there scattered all over the place. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and just delete. I'm going to delete these that I just made. So I have these. I have the case and I have the bullet. And what I want to do is I want to organically create piles of bullets that I can scatter. And I'm going to create a handful of different piles of bullets of different like size and densities, and I can scatter those entire bullets instead of scattering one bullet at a time. So I'm just going to go ahead. I'm going to create a cube, and I'm going to go in edit mode, because what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be doing a physics simulation, and those physics simulations of dropping bullets need to land on a ground that has some thickness to it. If I just use, if I just create a plane, sometimes objects will fall through that plane, and it's just kind of a pain in the butt to deal with. So I'm going to create a ground made out of a cube, and then with that cube selected, I'm going to go into edit mode. I'm just going to press S and Z to scale it down, make it kind of thin, and then I'm going to press S and just scale it way up. Okay, something like that looks good. I'm going to press 1 to go in my front view. Get out of edit mode. Press tab to get out of edit mode. And I'm going to press G and just move this down so it's just below the ground. There we go. Cool. Now, we're going to call this ground for now. This isn't going to be part of our scene. This is just going to help us create the piles of bullets. With the ground selected, I'm going to click on this icon right here, the physics property tab. I'm going to click on rigid body, and the type, I'm going to set that to passive. Everything else can stay the same. Actually, what I'm going to do is under the surface response, I'm going to turn the friction up to like 0.8, the bounciness up to like 0.2. Random values. I don't really know why I'm doing that just yet. I'm just gonna do that for now. Now, I'm going to click on this object, and I don't want to move it anymore. I don't want to keep on clicking on it accidentally. So at the outliner, at the top right of your screen here, click on the filter, and then just under restriction toggles, enable this little cursor icon. So now, inside of my outliner, every object has this little icon next to it. If I deselect that, or if I turn it off, that means that object is no longer selectable in my viewport. So if I zoom in on the bullets, I can click on the bullets, right? But I can't click on that ground that I accidentally made, because the ground's already set up. I don't need to move it at all. I don't need to change anything about it for now. So it'll just make your life easier if you turn off the selectability of that ground so you don't click on it accidentally. So now let's we have these two bullets. I'm going to create backups of them just in case. So let's Shift D, duplicate, and let's press M with these two selected and move it into a new collection called Bullet Backups. Cool, great. And I'm just going to disable that collection here and everything else. So now inside of this collection that's disabled, we have these 2 bullets that are just backups in case we need them for whatever reason. Great. Let's click on these 2 bullets. Let's move them into a new collection, call it bullet pile 01. Great. So now we have a collection called bullet pile 01 with these 2 bullets in it. So I want to just start duplicating them because I want a lot, right? So I'm going to Shift D, Shift D, Shift D. I probably want more bullet casings than I want actual unspent bullets. So I'm going to Shift D, Shift D, Shift D. And so now I just have all these bullets right here, right? And all of these are inside of that bullet pile 01. So the first things first is I want to click on one of these objects inside of this bullet pile. I'm going to click on one of the objects. I'm going to go to the physics property tab again, and I'm going to add rigid body. The type is going to be active, and then I'm just going to give it some friction and a little bit of bounciness. Now, making sure that you're at frame 0, if you're down here with your timeline, just click on the this far left button to go to the beginning of your timeline, and you go ahead and hit play. And you can see that the bullet just falls down to the ground. It has physics now, and it just kind of rolls forever. That might be an issue. I don't want to roll so much. So press spacebar to stop, go back to the beginning of your simulation, and the bullet's going to go back up here again. Let's just turn up the friction up to like 1. And maybe, let's just see what that does. Press spacebar to play. Yeah, cool. Falls in place. It rolls a little bit. That's okay. That's okay. We want a little bit of rolling. So this one bullet up here has physics properties set up for it. With this one bullet selected, now you can select all these other bullets. And again, make sure that anything that's not these bullets, you don't want to select it on accident. So just make sure that the selection or the selectability toggle is turned off for things like the ground. So we have all these bullets selected, and this other bullet, this first one, is also selected, but it's an active selection. And what that means is we can do things like copy the properties or the physics properties of that active bullet onto everything else. So with all these selected and this bullet actively selected, press F3 on your keyboard to bring up this panel right here. Or what you can do is click on Object, scroll down to Rigid Body, and click on Copy from Active. That's going to copy the rigid body physics properties from the active onto everything else. So now, if I go to the beginning of my timeline and press space, all those bullets just fall down. And they fall down organically, they roll, they collide with each other, and that looks far more realistic than trying to hand place it. It was also way easier. So I'm going to go back to the beginning. I'm going to hit spacebar for a second and then just stop. Hit spacebar and then stop. And I like this pile of bullets. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to select all those bullets. I'm going to go up to Object and make sure one of them is active. This might not work if you have everything in the dark orange. Make sure at least one of them is active. If they're not, just shift click on one of the bullets. It doesn't matter which one. Go up to Object at the top of the screen, go to Rigid Body, and hit Apply Transformation. Now, before you do anything, go up to Object, Rigid Body, and Remove. And so now, all of these bullets, if you look at the Properties tab, the Rigid Properties tab, none of them have rigid body properties anymore. If I hit space, nothing happens. All of these have had that simulation applied to the object. Now I could go in here and move some of them around, but now what I can do is, if I press 7 to go to the top view, if I select all those bullets, I can press Alt D to create copies and just start moving them around. Alt D, rotate, Alt D, rotate. I can select all those ones, Alt D. And if you press Alt D as opposed to Shift D, that just creates referenced copies. So it makes it a little bit easier for your computer to calculate everything. You could select all of them and press Shift D and move them around too, but it's just easier on your computer if you select them all and press Alt D. And so you can see now, with just that one pile of physics properties, I can create a bunch of copies and just start moving them around and scattering them around. And if I look here, I have a far more organic looking scattering of bullets. And you can see some of these bullets are like on top of each other. And I like that. That looks really good. It looks super organic. It looks natural. Some of them might be intersecting with each other. And that's okay. Honestly, you're not really going to notice anything like that. If you are in a camera view, let's just say your camera's right here. Let's say your camera's like right here. And you notice these bullets and they're like, oh, I can see that they're intersecting with each other. Just click on one of them and move it. Just click on that one and move it. But for the most part, most of these bullets, you're not going to notice the scattering or the intersections with each other. And that should look good. If by any chance, all these bullets, let's just say all these bullets are, let's move them up a little bit. You might do your physics simulation and then look at the ground and be like, oh, they're floating above the ground. And if I go to the side view, you can see like, oh, they're all floating above the ground. Well, then you just select all your bullets, go to the side view, press G, and move it down so that they're laying on the ground properly. Cool. So we have our bullet pile 1 group, which just has a bunch of bullets in it that we just scattered and duplicated and scattered. And you can honestly get away with just doing one. Like, you can't even tell that this is the same pile duplicated over and over and over again. But I want to create a couple other piles that are like a little bit higher up, a little bit denser pockets of bullets. So I'm going to hide this collection for now. I'm going to go and re-enable my bullets backup folder. I'm going to select these two and duplicate them. And these two duplicated, I'm going to put it into a new collection. So with them selected, I'm going to press M and then move to new collection. I'm going to call this bullet pile 02. Great. So I'm going to go ahead and hide the backup folder. So now I have these two. And just like I did before, I'm going to Shift D and duplicate these a bunch of times. And I probably want more casings than full unspent bullets. So I'm just going to duplicate these a few times. Something like that. Yeah, this looks pretty good. And so now what I'm going to do is, like I did before, one of those objects, just to make it easier, I'm going to click on the top left one again. I'm going to go to the Physics Property tab, add Rigid Body. Active is good. Friction, all the way up. Bounciness, give it a little bit of bounciness. Give it a quick test. Oh, wow. That's funny. That one actually fell perfectly and landed like that. Happy accident. I actually do want a couple bullets landing face up like that. But anyway, it works. That looks good. So now I'm going to select all of the bullets, making sure that that one with the physics is active. Go up to Object, Rigid Body, Copy from Active. And if I zoom out, press play, all the bullets fall together. Now, these ones are kind of scattering all over the place again. So let's go back to the beginning of our simulation, making sure you're at the first frame of your simulation. So just click this arrow to go all the way to the very beginning. Select all of them. I'm just going to press G to move them down to the ground a little bit more, just so they're barely above the ground. And then I actually want some of these closer together, something like that. And then let's go ahead and press enter, like that. Okay, cool. So I'm not getting as much of a pile as I want. So here's another trick. So yeah, I mean, obviously, like I can press spacebar and then duplicate all those and press spacebar again. And actually, I might try that. I'm going to show you two different ways you can get piles. So, you know, press spacebar and stop right away. The problem is that like some of these bullets might be floating in the air because they haven't finished moving. And you can always delete those later. So you can spacebar and then let them do their thing. You can delete any of these extra ones if you want to. And then just apply the transformation and copy and paste that pile again. But what I'm going to do instead is I'm going to do something that's a little more fun to do. So all of these bullets have active rigid body selections on them, right? Or active rigid body properties. So they all follow physics. What I'm going to do is I'm going to press Shift A to create a force field. And I'm going to create just a standard force field. And what that is just this little empty right here. this empty, we can go over to our timeline. We can see, or our outliner at the top right here, we can see we have an object called force. And if we go to the physics property of this force, we can see it's a point. So the force is coming from this point, and the strength is at 1. If we turn that strength way up to like 500, right? And press enter, make sure at the beginning of the simulation press space, all these bullets went flying off in this direction. So maybe let's change this to like 50, right? If I bring this force over here, it's pushing the bullets away, right? We actually don't want that. What we want is the opposite. So I'm going to change the strength to negative, let's just say negative 1000, okay? And if I press space, go back to the beginning of the simulation and press space to play, it pulls in all of these objects to that force field. If I move the force field away, it pulls it closer. I don't want it bouncing around so much, so I'm actually going to hit space, go back to the beginning of the simulation. I'm going to make the strength like 10,000, negative 10,000. And I'm going to hit with this selected, press space bar, boom. I'm just going to bring this down to the ground and stop. And so now I have like a little pile. Now what I can do is I can turn off, so I haven't reset the simulation yet, I just hit space to pause it. I'm going to turn the strength of this force field to 0, and then hit play one more time, and just let it kind of diffuse out a little bit. I actually want way more objects than this, so I'm going to actually duplicate all of these. Go back to the beginning of my simulation. Oops, I didn't mean to duplicate my force, so let's delete that second force. So we have this force now, and let's just press spacebar. Oh, and I forgot that I gave a force of 0 to the force field, so let's change that back to negative 1000 and hit spacebar. Brings them in like that. Spacebar again. Let's just bring this down. Now, if you have a whole bunch of objects, this might slow your computer down, so you might have to just do this with smaller amounts of bullets and repeat it over and over. So now I have a cool little pile of bullets because they're all being pulled into that force. I'm going to hit spacebar, turn off the force to 0, or set the strength of that force field to 0. Hit spacebar for just a second. I'm going to tap and let go. Tap and let go. And boom. Now I have a pile of bullets that they were all pulled together, and then I let them just fall from place for a second. So I'm going to delete that force field. Don't hit play or anything yet. Now you want to select all of those bullets, make sure one of them is active, so just shift click on any one of them to turn light orange. And like we did before, object, rigid body, apply transformation, and then object, rigid body, remove. So now if I hit spacebar, nothing happens because these no longer have physics simulation properties. But now I have a cool pile of bullets. So I'm going to go ahead and collapse that group. So we have pile 1, which are all these, and if I turn on pile 2, we have this pile of bullets right here. And so now what I could do is I could just select that pile of bullets right here. Maybe these ones are here. At the top view, I'm just going to Alt-D, duplicate, rotate, duplicate, rotate. And if you want, maybe you can have like a bigger pile of bullets. So right now I just created like 3 separate piles of bullets, but you can just go in here and Alt-D and like move them next to each other like this. I'm going to do another pile over there and another pile over there. Just rotate a little bit. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to Alt-D, another pile. I'm going to just bring it up a bit higher. So it's just kind of floating above everything. And obviously I can see the edges of that. So I'm going to Alt-D again and just kind of fill in those areas of bullets. And I could rotate a little bit. I can get away with a little bit of cheating here. Not everything has to make perfect sense. And just to save myself some trouble, a couple of these floating bullets, I'm just going to delete those. Cool. Well, here's a couple more floating bullets that I don't like. Or you could just move them. You don't even have to delete them. You can just move them down a bit. Okay, cool. So now I have all these bullets that are scattered around everywhere. And if I go into my material properties tab, or my material view, you can see they all have that same material on them, right? And yeah, that's looking pretty cool. I have tons of piles of bullets now. So I'm just gonna go ahead and actually move. I'm gonna select I'm going to right click this bullet pile 2 collection, and I'm going to click on select objects, and I'm going to press M and move that into bullet pile 1. So now I can delete this empty collection and just call it bullet pile. So if I right click the selection and go select objects, I now have all of these bullets selected. So what I can do is Control C and copy objects, go back into my other Blender file. This is where I set up my lighting and my camera. I'm going to click on my bullets collection that I made and press Control V to paste. It might take a couple seconds to think, just give it time. So now we have, oops, again, if your camera gets all turned around, click on something in your outliner like a human reference of your camera and press period. And if that doesn't work, or if you don't have the number pad, just go up to view, frame selected. And so now, look, now we have all these bullets everywhere. Now you can see that the bullets are kind of like in the ground. And that's because when we did our physics simulation, this ground right here is lower than the ground that we have here. So really simply fixed, just right click the bullet selection or the bullet collection, select objects, press G and Z to move up. We'll just, holding shift, we can do a small selection. And we'll just move it so they're barely above the ground. Probably look at one of these empty shells to give us a better view. I'm going to press G, Z, holding shift, I'm going to do a very small selection just so the bullet is barely resting on the ground. There you go. Cool. Now we have a bunch of, whoops. Now we have a bunch of bullets scattered all over the place. Cool, great. Now we can start building our scene, or more specifically, we can start laying out the bullet scatters from our camera perspective. So I'm going to go back into my camera view, and I'm going to start moving these piles of bullets around into an area that I like. So I'm thinking I might have like a bullet pile somewhere over here where I might have her rocket launcher gun kind of sticking out of, and then I might have another bigger pile closer to the camera around here where I might have her her minigun kind of poking out of, and then again just piles of bullets going off into forever into the background. And we're going to do some other techniques real quick to make the background fade off into nothingness. So let's go back to the bullet selection or the bullets collection. I'm going to right click, select objects, and I'm just going to press G to move. And if I pressed Shift Z, it's going to move on the X and Y axis and not on the Z axis. So now I can start moving these around and just start getting them into areas that I like. So yeah, like I said, this step right here is just playing around with movements of pieces. I might duplicate, or I'm going to duplicate these piles several different times. Now, real quick, like I said before, I don't want to accidentally select my backdrop. See, if I click here, I selected my backdrop. That's this big seamless backdrop. I don't want to move that anymore. I will adjust the material on that later, which requires selecting it. But for now, I don't want to move it around. So I'm going to click on that, turn on the restriction toggles for selectability, and then on the backdrop, I'm just going to turn that off. Same thing with my lights too. On this lights collection, I don't want to select my lights, and I don't want to select my human reference or my camera anymore. So these objects, nothing in my scene is selectable now except for my bullets. And that'll make it easier for me to just select piles of bullets and move them like that. So from here on out, I'm just going to speed up the video of me moving bullets around and changing the orientation, duplicating and scattering more different piles here and there, just until I get something that I like. And then I'll see you when I'm done with that. Okay, so I'm pretty happy with the placement of my bullets for now, but there's some lighting issues that I need to adjust, and then there's another really important issue is that of the bullets just kind of, you can see the line of where the scattering of the bullets end and then nothingness begins. It's just a very stark line, and I want that to kind of have a fall off, which means I want some sort of like fog or volume atmosphere to kind of get denser as it goes further into the background, which kind of blocks things off. So to do that, I'm going to create a fog volume or a volume object. So to do that, let's just create a cube inside of the lights folder. Call Shift A, add a cube. Now let's get out of camera view for a second. And okay, so I can't select the cube, and that's because the cube is in the lights object or the lights collection, and that collection selectability is turned off. So let's just go ahead and turn that back on again. Let's do the same thing with everything else. Just because we're done scattering for now, so we don't need to worry about accidentally selecting things. So we have this cube right here, and we want this cube to be filled with fog or volume. So first things first, I want to scale this cube up so it's the size of my scene. Something like that, kind of ends back there, right? It covers my whole scene of like the objects, my camera, and everything else. And you can see if we go inside of the cube, it blocks off light for everything that we want. Everything back here, technically this is part of my scene, but it's supposed to just go off for forever in all directions. So now that we have this cube, let's go ahead and name it volume cube. And we're going to open up a new window, just selecting the bottom corner of any window and dragging over. We're going to change that viewport to shader editor. And then with that cube selected, we're going to give it a new material. We could also add a new material from the materials property tab right here. And then we're going to delete the principal BDSF. We're going to press Shift A, search, and type in volume. And we can just type in volume scatter. We're going to create the volume scatter node and plug the volume output of that node into the volume of the material output. And then as we see here, it looks like it's a solid cube, but it's really just a really, really dense volume or dense fog, the size of the cube or the shape of the cube. If we turn the density down from this from 1 to, let's just say 0.1. Let's try that for now. We can see what's going on here. It's now, we got a cube that's filled with a fog. It's still too dense. Okay, so if we go into the camera view, we can kind of see a representation, or we can see what's going on with this fog. We can see, if we zoom in, we can see as it gets farther away from the camera, the fog is denser because there's more of it between you and that point in 3D space. And as we get closer to the camera, there's less fog, just like how fog works in real life. So if we turn up the density of this to like 0.2, maybe 0.3, yeah, if we turn up to like 0.2, it is way too dense. We can't, one, it's way too dark, it blocks way too much light, and we can't see anything. So what we could do is, we're going to do a couple things. We're going to balance out both the exposure of the background, so the strength of this background layer, we can turn this up, and the higher the strength of the background or the world color, the more light scatters through that volume, and we can see more things. It's a brighter volume. But then we also still see that direct lines. We want to have that line lessened by adding more haze back there. So of course we can keep turning up the volume density, and then we can keep turning up the brightness, but then at some point it just kind of gets way too dense and way too hard to see anything. So what we want to do is, let's just turn this back down to like a strength of, let's just say 5, and let's just turn this density back down to like let's say 0.3, right? Let's get out of camera view, and let's move this volume a little bit farther away from our scene. Let's move it back here. So the fog starts just behind our main scene. Let's bring it up a little bit closer. The fog starts just behind our main scene. So we have nothing directly around the camera, but the fog starts back there. And if we go back into our camera view, obviously everything's way too strong. So let's turn the strength back down to like 1. Maybe even 0.2. 0.3. Like I said, at this point, when you're trying to balance out the lighting, power, and the density of fogs, it's just a balance of back and forth between changing both the density of the fog, the power of your lights or your scene lighting, and even the positioning of the fog. So I actually do want a little bit more fog in my foreground, just a little bit. So I'm going to bring this a little bit closer. All right, so that's looking a little bit better, but there are still a couple of other things we can do to make this even nicer. So when we set up our camera, there's a tab here in the object data properties for the camera called depth of field. And as you might have guessed, we can enable depth of field because right now, things that are close to the camera are just as sharp as things that are very far away from the camera. These might be a little hard. These objects in the distance might be a little bit harder to see because there's a lot of fog. Let's just turn off that fog for now. We can see everything far away is also perfectly sharp. We don't want things that are perfectly sharp. We want a nice fall off because if we remember when we looked at this, this was shot at f3.5, which is a fairly shallow depth of field. We can see here, oops. Okay. What's going on here? If we look at the foreground, we can see this is not very far away from our subject, but it's completely out of focus, right? And it's hard to tell because the backdrop is just a seamless backdrop. But if you look at the dust on the ground here, it's also really out of focus. So we have a fairly shallow depth of field in the image. And in our 3D scene, we don't have that. So let's create the depth of field, which will also help lessen the fall off between where the bullets start and end, combined with the volume. So clicking on the camera, click on depth of field, enable that checkbox, and then we want to select where our focus is at. Now you could just click on the eyedropper and click on somewhere on your scene, but that's not going to really make any sense in terms of what the camera thinks, because you can see even though I click the eyedropper right here on the ground, it's not focusing on that point. What it's doing is it's focusing on the origin of that object. And the object is the backdrop. That's the big seamless thing that we created. And the origin point of that happens to be way back here. Way back here. That's the origin of this object, and that's what it's focused on. So instead of focusing on an object in our scene, what we can do is we can press Shift-A and create an empty. Plain axis empty works. It doesn't matter what kind of empty. Just create an empty. And then if we press G, we can move this around. We can just see we have this crosshair looking thing. Let's put this in our main collection next to our camera. And we're going to call this focus point. And let's get it out of our camera for a second and zoom in on that empty. We can have this empty kind of where our subject would be in 3D space. And let's have the point of it kind of near where the head would be. Something like that. Okay? Now, if we go to our camera, go to depth of field, our focus object, let's X that, get rid of it, click on the eyedropper, and then let's just click on the eyedropper in our outliner where it says focus point. And so now it's going to perfectly focus wherever this empty is at. If I bring this empty really close to the camera, it's going to focus on that. If I bring it really far away, it's going to focus on it back there. Let's not move it anywhere. Let's just keep it centered on our scene. Something like that will work. So now, if we look at our scene, all these bullets in the foreground, nice and blurry. All the bullets in the background, also blurry. Now, we set the focal point, but we didn't really change the settings at all. So if we go to our camera, go down in depth of field, we can see that the default setup is f2.8. Now, if your scale of your 3D scene is 1:1, so nothing is scaled up really big or really small, and that's a good point to use a human reference to scale your scene. The human 3D object is the size of an average human. So I know that my scene is an average human scale. So if that is the case, your f-stop will behave how your f-stop would in real life. So if I shot this scene at 2.8 in real life, this is the amount of depth of field I would get. He shot it at 3.5, so this is what the scene would look like in real life. Now I think I want a little more in focus in the foreground, just a little more. So what I could do is I can maybe set this to maybe 4, F4 sounds good. So I still get that nice fall off in the background, and I still get that fall off in the foreground. Now let's re-enable our volume cube again. And between these two, between the depth of field and the volume fog, we now solve the issue of that hard edge line of the bullets in the background. But everything is still looking a little flat. And that is because if we look at our scene, we can see that we have this world lighting that's just this big white flat light that's coming from all directions, 360 degrees. And what that's also doing is it's lighting our scene from the front. And when you have lights coming from the same direction as your camera, it fills in all of the shadows. And when you do that, you remove all the dynamic lighting from your image. If you look at any movie with nice lighting, you're going to notice that most of the time the lighting is coming from the side or the back or the top, but it's almost never coming directly from the front. And if it is, it's very dim compared to everything else out. So we want to retain those shadows coming from the front of our image while still being lit by the same lighting coming from the sides, top, and back. So what can we do to control the lighting coming from this world? Well, we can, of course, create, walls and stuff. Because if you imagine that we're in a studio, we would be in a studio that's blocking lighting coming from behind with walls and whatnot. So in the Lights tab, I'm going to have that selected, and I'm going to create an object. And this object is just going to be a giant mesh plane. And so if I press, where are we at? Let's turn on my overlays. So we can see here, I just created a plane. And what I'm creating here is what we call in the cinema world or the film world, a flag. A flag is just an object, generally a big black square fabric that blocks light. And you can set up flags, or it's also called negative fill, if it's a big thing behind the camera, that blocks light from hitting the front of subjects. So I'm going to rotate this for now, just like this. And because it's white, it's bouncing a lot of light. It's acting like the opposite of a flag. It's acting as a bounce board. If I go to the materials of this flag, and let's just name the object flag, and we'll give it a new material, and we're going to set the material base color to black, and the roughness all the way up. So now we have this black square, and it might not be noticeable what it's doing now, but let me just move this behind the camera, and I'm going to scale this up a lot. I'm going to make it huge, something like 100 times big. And now you can see we have this giant square that's blocking light from coming from behind the camera, filling in the front of our scene. Now, of course, it's also blocking lighting, a lot of the light that's hitting our scene. So what we could do is, let's go back into our camera, and you can see with and without that flag, without the flag, and with the flag. So now our scene is way darker because it's blocking a lot of light coming from the front, but we can balance that with more light from the sides and the top. So let's make the strength of this like 5 and see what happens. Now it's way too much. Maybe like 2, maybe 3. So now we have a little bit more of a dynamic image, but still not quite enough. And what's happening is we still have way too much light coming in from the sides here. And so what we can do is we can click on this flag object, click on the edges here and here. So shift click this edge and that edge. And I'm going to press E and then Y to extrude on the edges here. And so now if I go back to my camera view, less light is hitting from the sides and back. And so I could go in here and I can just go to the side view and like kind of turn it a little bit like this, move it around, and just go back to my camera view and kind of see what's going on here. And by moving this thing around, if it's hard to if you want to be able to see what's happening in real time to your render view while moving the object around, you can just create another window. So I'll just drag down here at the bottom of this window, create a new window, make a 3D viewport, and then you can see I can just move around inside of this view and start moving things around. So I'm going to start moving this around and just see, I'm going to go to the side view and just see what this does for my image. Does this help by turning it and rotating it and moving it around? And what I'm looking to do is I'm looking to gain a good amount of shadows on the front of my object. So looking at these bullet casings right here, you can see all of a sudden there's shadows. If I get rid of this flag and turn this back down, you can see it's front lit. There's almost no shadows on the front of this. It's even lighting everywhere. If I turn this flag back on and turn the brightness back up, you can see now I have that nice lighting but I'm also retaining nice front shadows, and that helps to give a dynamic image. That makes things look just a little bit nicer. So yeah, so I have the volume set up. I have a flag, a giant flag that's blocking a lot of light from the back or coming from the front of the camera. And then I've just adjusted my world strength lighting just to have a nice base point for my lighting. I think I want this to be maybe a little bit more blue though. Something closer to that. That looks pretty good. I like that. Yeah, that looks good. And then let's see. From here, I still feel like the image is a little too dark. So what I want to do is I want to add another light, another like an area light or a point light or a spotlight that just kind of lights my scene a little bit more with like some generic soft lighting without any strong color. And again, if you look at the original image, I do have that white light that's somewhere above the camera that's lighting my scene, because you can tell the ground here is fairly neutral colored. It has a little bit of a color tint to it, but it is being blended a little bit better because there's a white light. If that white light in real life wasn't there, this would be like pure blue or pure green or something like that. So I want to try and replicate a similar condition to that, a similar lighting condition. So in the lights tab, I'm going to, well, first I'm going to turn off the selection of that flag because I don't want to keep clicking on that. And I'm going to press Shift A, create an area light, and just drag this up. Now, already, we can see with that area light, and that's just a big square area light, kind of like a softbox directly above my subject. Already, we have a much more dynamic lighting scenario. We can see we have this nice pool of light around our bullets and our subject, and that actually looks very similar to what we have going on in here. We have kind of a pool of light around here, around our subject. So I'm actually really liking what this is doing. I might move it back away from the camera a little bit. And then maybe I'll bring it up a bit. Now, you can see here this light is intersecting the fog over here because I have this giant fog cube, remember? And you can see it's, whoops, where'd it go? You can see it intersecting right there. And because it's intersecting with that volume cube, it's scattering light in the volume. I actually don't want this light source to scatter light. I actually really don't want any of my spotlights to scatter light in the scene. While that would be physically correct, I actually want to I want to work on any kind of light rays in Photoshop. So I'm going to click on each one of my lights that I created, not my world lighting, but my individual lights. I'm going to click on those lights, and then under this yellow square icon right here, the object data properties, I'm going to scroll down to visibility. I'm going to open that up. And under ray visibility, I'm going to uncheck volume scatter. And so what that means is the light rays that are coming from that object won't be visible inside of volume. So I'm going to do that for each one of my other lights, just for now. It'll also make my computer run a little bit faster, or my viewport run a little bit faster, because it doesn't have to try and calculate all that bounce lighting. So going back to my area light, I'm just bring that back a bit. And the cool thing with area lights is you can also scale them up and down, and they'll affect more and less of your scene. And because I have this area light that's kind of lighting up my main area of my scene, I could also freely, if I wanted to, I could really turn down my environment lighting to 0. And now I have this like really nice, super sharp or super dark, contrasty looking environment. But I don't want that. I liked what I had here. Something like this looks pretty good. I could adjust the strength of my white light to be more or less. And that's looking pretty good. I'm liking how this is looking so far. So before I start adding in some other objects into my scene, there's a couple things I want to change. One, our seamless backdrop has no material on it. It's just flat white. But if you look at our original scene, right, in Photoshop, there's dirt, there's little scuff marks and scratches and stuff. And we can retain this information from the photo and bring it into our 3D environment. But I also want to add a material onto our 3D scene just so maybe there's a little bit more details, or it just has a little bit better lighting on it. Something that doesn't look so perfectly flat, right? So let's go ahead and create a very basic material for this plane, for this backdrop material. And you're really only going to be seeing it kind of in this area. Anything that's way back in the distance, you won't really notice it at all. But you will notice it around this pool of light. And this one bullet's bugging me, so I'm actually I'm gonna delete that, or just move that bullet over here. Okay, so back to the seamless backdrop. So we're gonna click on that seamless backdrop, and we're gonna open up the shader editor. Click on new material, because it doesn't have a material yet. And we'll call this backdrop material. And right now it is it's just a white material with a generic flat roughness. And you can see if I turn the roughness all the way down to 0, you can see that it is now like a reflective plane, and that looks kind of cool. I actually like the reflectivity of it, but it looks almost like you poured water because it's reflective everywhere. So what we want to do is we want to add a roughness, a varying roughness texture to this. So some areas are rough, some are a little bit shinier, and we can do that really easily with a noise texture. So I'm going to press Shift A in the shader editor and type in, under search, type in noise and add a noise texture. And if I Control Shift left click on that noise texture, we can preview what that looks like. Let me get out of camera mode, and I want to actually solo this object. I want to solo this background object. So if I have the background selected, move my mouse in the viewport and press the / key. That's the one with the question mark on it. Let's go back to my camera view, and let's see what this material looks like. Now this is the area in focus, or this is the area that we're really paying attention to, right? This is the area that we want to look at. So just focusing on that area right there, let's go ahead and press Control T on the noise texture tab to add these two nodes, texture coordinates and the mapping. And let's just turn this, let's adjust the scale a bit. Or actually, you know what? Let's get rid of that. We can just adjust the scale of the noise texture in here. So let's try, instead of 5, let's try 20 and see what happens. So it gets a little bit smaller. Let's try like 50, something like that. Maybe even like 150. Okay, cool. That works. And again, it's repeating a lot in the background because it's very far away, but we're just looking at this area around here. And then we can turn up the detail and the roughness a bit. And it might be hard to see what's going on. So what we can do is we can Shift A, search, type in color ramp, and then add a color ramp after the noise texture. And let's just crunch in these values a little bit more. Add a little bit more contrast. And now we can see what this texture is looking like. Wherever it's black is going to be perfectly shiny, and wherever it's white is going to be fully rough. So let's feed this color of the output of this color ramp into the roughness, and let's Control Shift left click on the principal BDSF again, so we're looking at the proper material. And let's unsolo everything by clicking that / key again. Let's go back into our camera view, and let's see what's going on here. Let's kind of zoom in down here a bit, and we can see what's going on. We can see we have areas that are perfectly shiny and some areas that are perfectly rough. I think it's way too much of a difference. So let's reduce this contrast down a bit. Something like that looks pretty good. Yeah. And I don't want any areas to be perfectly shiny because it's paper, right? Or it's something that's not water. So nothing here should be perfectly shiny. So this black point right here, I'm going to click on this node, this little handle right here, and change the color of it from black to something that's like a little bit lighter. Not quite black, but darker. And I could change the gradient to something ease, so it's not as sharp of a difference. Yeah. I'm just going to turn up the details and the roughness a bit. Well, that's way too much roughness. And also the scale's way too big now. Let's try 50, and then let's turn the details all the way up. Let's try a roughness of like 1. Let's change the scale down. Okay, let's just preview the color ramp again. So Control Shift T, or Control Shift left click on that. Let's make this black again, just so we can see what we're dealing with. Okay, so maybe I made the scale way too small in the first place. Let's turn the roughness to like something like 0.8. And yeah, we're just looking for a variation that looks something like this, just so we have some areas that are kind of shiny and some areas that are kind of rough. Let's make sure we're previewing the texture again and not just that node. Turn this back to something that's gray. And okay. Yeah, I'm happy with that. That looks good. That has some nice variation in texture. It doesn't look all the same everywhere. And there's one more thing that we can do to add a little bit of like dirt and grime to the ground. So we're going to do what is called a decal. And this is used a lot in 3D. Instead of texturing the surface of the object, what you can do is you can get a material, put it on just a square, and then blend that, put that square with the material on top of an object. So I'll show you exactly what I mean. So let's get out of our camera view for a second. Let's just kind of zoom in on this area. And what I'm going to do is make sure I have my normal selection collected because I don't want to create something in lights. I'm going to press Shift A, Mesh, Plane. I'm going to just bring this up for now. Bring this a little bit closer to the camera so we can see what's going on. So we're going to create a new material on this. Press New Material. And we're going to call this Ground Decal. Let's open up the shader editor a bit and let's see what we got going on here. So what we want to do is we want to bring in a texture that has some sort of like grime or grunge, like a grunge texture would work really, really good. So I'm going to go ahead and find a free grunge texture on something like pexels.com and see what's working. Okay, so this looks cool. I think this will work fine. I just found like a generic concrete grunge texture. So I'm just going to go ahead and download this one right here. And again, I'll have the link for this texture if you want to use it, but you could really use any texture you want. So going back to Blender, inside of the shader editor for this plane that I created, I'm going to press Control A and add an image texture node, right? And then I'm going to click on Open. And I'm just going to navigate to the texture I just downloaded and open that up. And then I'm going to feed that color into the base color of my texture. Great. And so now you can see this plane has that grunge texture on it. Now, if there's this is a perfectly square plane, but if your texture that you downloaded is like a little bit wider, you could just scale your texture up or scale your mesh up to fit that. And so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to feed the color of this into the alpha of my texture. And what that does is it creates anything that's going into the alpha socket of a material is going to act like a mask. Anything that's dark is going to be transparent, and anything that's white is going to be opaque. So if I add a color ramp and I feed this texture, this grunge texture, into the color ramp, and I look at this color ramp, Control Shift left click, here's a black and white preview of what this texture looks like. So what we really want out of this mask is an inverted color of our actual image. Because if we look here, this is what the image looks like. We have dark dirt bits everywhere. But the mask for those dark bits need to be inverted. So what we're going to do is we're going to flip these two handles. So now we have the inverted color map, black and white, of that image. So anything that's black is going to be transparent, and anything that's white is going to be opaque. So let's just crunch this down a bit, and we'll adjust this in a second. And let's feed this color output of the color ramp into the alpha. And let's make sure we're previewing this node. And so now what you're going to see is we have a partially transparent image. We can adjust the transparency of it by just moving around these handles. And every image is going to be different, so just play around with it until you get something that you like. There's really no correct way to do this in terms of like where the sliders are at or what direction they're facing, or if they're black or white or black. Just kind of place it wherever you like it to. And then now that I have like this grunge texture, I'm going to go ahead and press G and Z and move it down to the ground. And I want it just barely above the ground. So I'm moving it up slowly just until it just barely intersects the ground. Oh, and that's too much. Okay, cool. So let's go ahead and put this back in the center. Actually, let's bring it a little bit closer to the camera. Let's scale it up quite a bit. And I'm going to bring it up a bit more again. There we go. Okay, cool. So now we have this grunge texture. What I actually want to do is I want to scale this grunge texture up a bit higher so I don't see the edge of the borders. And then what I want to do is I want to tile this texture. So I'm tiling the texture inside of the object. So I'm going to click on this image texture, press Control T to create these. And again, Control T if you have the Node Wrangler enabled. And then I'll just change the scale from like 1 to, let's say, 2. So now everything's tiles 2 times in here. And you might need to be careful of like where these lines are. So you might need to adjust the positioning of this a bit. And this is also way too dark. So I'm going to play around with this color ramp just so I can get the values that I want from this. And so even when I'm crunching these, I'm still not getting the values that I want. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a gamma node in front of this color ramp and see if I can mess around with this just to get something a little bit closer to what I'm looking for. There we go. That's looking a little bit nicer. So now we can see, we're zoomed in here, we get this nice grungy, dirty texture that just, yeah, it just adds a little bit of variation to the ground. And it's just a really quick and easy way to add variations to texture. I'm going to move this whole thing a little bit. Now, if your viewport is moving around really slowly like mine is, it's because we have 29,000 bullets scattered all over the ground. So for now, I'm just going to turn off the visibility of that. And so now it should move a little bit faster in my viewport. So, and I'll turn this back on in a bit. Right now I'm just messing with the ground. So we'll call this ground decal as well. And just move it around. Let's go back to the camera view and make sure it looks good from this view, because it doesn't really matter how it looks anywhere else. Only that it looks good from here. Okay, cool. Yeah, I like the way that looks. You could also go in here and let's click on the decal. You could change the roughness all the way up or all the way down, whatever you want. I think since it's grungy bits, it should be fully rough because it's supposed to be like dirt and whatnot. And yeah, super simple way to get ground decals. Okay, so at this point, I think it's safe for me to start bringing in some other objects, some other 3D objects that I want into this scene. So I'm going to go ahead and create a new collection, and I'll just call this other stuff. Sure, whatever. And then let's see. Let's go back to Sketchfab and see what other objects that I'm going to download. Here's one of the objects that I'm downloading. This is one of Jinx's shark rocket launchers that this person made. So thank you to this person for creating this for free. And yeah, so we'll just go ahead and download this. And then I'm also going to download Jinx's minigun. So this is a pretty cool one that I found, also available for free on Sketchfab. So thank you to this person for creating this. It looks great. And yeah, so credits to these people for creating these objects for free on Sketchfab. Okay, so just like I do with everything else, whenever I'm getting models from online, I like to open them up in a different Blender project file, just so I don't have my main file cluttered with unnecessary stuff. So I'm going to go ahead and let's get this first item, just drag it right into Blender's viewport here, hit import FBX, and let's see, did it load up the materials? And so this is what I mean. When I drag this object in, this one is made up of all these other smaller objects. So you can see if I click on any one of these, I can move it around. The materials are looking a little off. I'm not exactly sure if that's how they're supposed to look. So let's check it out. Let's see what's going on here. So So if I just click on this piece right here, this metallic face head thing, and open up with the materials property, I can see here it does have a material on it already applied, but if I look at what the material is made out of, there's nothing here. I mean there's the material shader, but there's no information going into them at all. So let's delete that, and then with this material selected, or with this principal BDSF selected, I'm going to press Control-Shift-T, and then let's just navigate to the folder of where I downloaded that. So this is the shark weapon and textures, and this person seemed to name all their textures that correspond with the material name in 3D. So this is called material underscore cabeza, I'm not sure. So let's just find this. Here we go. Material cabeza, base color, metallic, normal, roughness. Those are the ones we want, and those are the ones they have. So cool. With those 4 selected, hit this setup, and there you go. Okay, that's looking much better. So this is one of those case scenarios where the materials are on the object. We can see if we click on each one of these objects, the material is on it, but the material maps have not loaded up properly. And the material maps, again, are just things like the roughness information, the extra scratches and details information, the color information. All of those are supplied by images, and those images need to be reconnected. So for each one of these objects, I'm just going to recreate or reconnect each one of the information maps one by one until all of this object looks how it should, at least how it did in the preview. In the case where like maybe the object's materials don't look good at all, but the physical model does, you can always add your own textures to it and retexture it if you want to. In this case, I'm pretty happy with how they look. I might change them a bit, but for now, we'll just go with what they have. So I'll see you in a second after I've reconnected all of these objects with their proper textures the same way that I did just now for this one right here. Okay, I think that's everything. Let's go ahead and turn the visibility of all of those back on again. And yeah, that's looking cool. Let's see, I'm not liking this piece right here, so I'm just gonna delete that. Delete these two because we're not gonna see it. And yeah, this is looking pretty cool. I think maybe I'll change. So I like this, but I want it to be kind of like a gunmetal gray everywhere. So I think what I can do is I'm gonna click on this first piece right here, and I'm going to add a hue saturation value node right here. I'm going to feed it in between the base color and the BDSF node, and I'm just going to turn the saturation down to 0. So now it's perfectly gray. I'm going to copy that, Control C, or actually right click and copy that. I'm going to quickly go to each one of these, paste it, and just feed it in. Click on that, paste it, feed it in. Just all these things that I want to be kind of gray, paste it, feed it in. Yeah, shouldn't take too long. Okay, that's looking a little bit better. And then maybe the eye texture, the eye color, I'm going to make that a little bit more blue. So hue and saturation, and we'll just move the hue a bit more. Something like that. That looks kind of cool. Yeah, I'm liking that. So I'm going to select all of these, and generally if the object is already split into a bunch of parts, you generally don't want to merge them all together, because that might mess up the mapping of the texture. So let's just see what that does. If I merge all these together, okay, cool. It didn't mess anything up. So if it did, then I would just leave them all as one part. In fact, I'm just going to leave them all as separate parts, just so you know what I would do in that case. So let's say merging them all into one object didn't work. What you could do is you can create an empty. Yeah, just a plain axis empty is fine. Let's line it up with the object like that. And I'm going to select all of these objects, and then I'm going to make sure that the empty is active, so it's a lighter orange. And I'm going to press Control P, set parent to object. And then if I click on this empty, I can name it Shark Gun. And if I click on this empty, you can see wherever I move the empty around, the rest of it follows. Great, cool. So I can just select all these objects now. I'm going to do Control C, copy objects. I'm going to go back into my original Blender project. Let's just name this Shark Gun. And with that, I'm going to press Control V and paste it. Give it a second. It has to think about this new material. And we don't know where it's going to be in 3D space. There it is. It's huge and above our subject. So with that empty that we created selected, I'm just going to scale this down a bit so it's the size of her actual gun, and we can use this body as a reference. So that's looking pretty good, maybe a little bit bigger. Okay, cool. And materials look pretty decent on this lighting. I like the way it looks and reflects all these lights and whatnot. So I'm going to have it placed in this pile of bullets over here. And then I'm thinking just maybe move it around like this. And again, I am moving and scaling and rotating the empty in which all of the gun parts are parented to. So just a balance again with everything else of just placing stuff in areas. And let's go back to our camera view and adjust things as needed. Okay, cool. Yeah, I'm liking the way that looks. And I'll adjust the lighting later. I think I'm just gonna leave that there for now. I might go in here and let's turn off the selectability of the backdrop so I can grab some of these bullets. Now, these bullets are also inside the volume cube, so I want to turn off the selectability of the volume cube as well, just so I'm not clicking on that. And let's just click on some of these objects. Alt-D to duplicate. Oh, you know what? I also have the decal selected. So let's turn off the selectability of the decal as well. And this is why it's a good idea to have everything organized so you can quickly find the object and adjust what you need to. So the decal, I also want to turn off that selectability. I just want to select these bullets right here. And I'm going to go ahead and Alt-D, duplicate, move these around, scale it on the Z-axis, something like that, and just kind of blend in this pile right here so it looks like it's sitting in that pile of bullets. Yeah, that's looking really cool. I like that. Now let's get the minigun in here as well. So let's just create a collection, shark, bring this inside. So it only brought the empty inside, so just I'm going to select everything else, bring that also inside. Let's create a new collection. We'll call this minigun. Let's turn off the visibility of this one. Minigun. Great. Okay, cool. And then we're just going to bring going to drag the minigun right into there. Hit import. Okay, cool. And again, a whole bunch of objects and no textures on any of them, I don't think. Yeah, so none of these even have a single texture on it. But let's try setting this up. So because there's not even a texture on them, we don't even know which piece is supposed to have which texture. So we're just going to see how this works. So let's start with this barrel piece right here, I guess. Or let's start with something like this back end right here. I'm going to click on that, add a new material, and then with the BDSF selected and the Node Wrangler enabled, Control-Shift-T, and let's locate this folder. Here's the Jinx Pow Pow minigun. Go to Textures, and we see here in the Textures folder there are only 4 maps: base color, metallic, normal, roughness. So I'm assuming that these 4 maps go into one material, and that one material is on all of these pieces. So let's see how that works. Selecting these ones, hit setup, give it a second, and then theoretically, I'm assuming all of these other pieces have that same material. So let's try that. So let's select everything, and then shift click on that one with the material, load it up, and press Control L to link. Control L, link materials. And yeah, just like that, we lucked out that all of these other pieces have the same material on it and it's mapped properly. So that looks cool. Yeah. And what you could do is, if you wanted to, since this is all one material, if you wanted to, like, let's say, affect the roughness on everything, you can just add like a gamma node, feed it into the roughness, and play around with the slider to adjust the roughness. And the same thing with the color, just like we did before, a hue and saturation value node. And if I wanted this to be more of a desaturated color, I can turn the saturation down. I can also change the value, make it darker, something like that. Yeah, let's see how that looks. So again, I'm going to see if all of these objects can be merged into one object. And yeah, so I selected all the objects, shift clicked on one of them and pressed Control J, and it just merged it into one object. And as you can see, everything still looks perfect. So if that's the case, then you're good to go. I'm going to rename this minigun. I'm going to press Control C to copy objects and then go back into here. Let's create a new collection called minigun. Paste it in, Control V, and let's get out of camera view real quick and see what we got. So here it is in our scene. Way too big. Let's scale it down. Probably something like that. And in this lighting, I actually think it's a little too dark, so I'm gonna put this back to its default for now. We'll adjust, well, I'll make it a little bit less saturated, 0.8, a bit darker. Okay, cool. And then I want this in the foreground, so I'm just moving it around, G and Z, G and X. Okay, that's looking cool. Yeah, I'm liking that a lot. Let's see if I can make it a little bit shinier, so I'm going to adjust this gamma on the roughness map. And yeah, that's looking good. So at this point, I'm pretty happy with the materials on everything. I'm pretty happy with the layout of and the composition, but I want to tweak my materials a little bit because right now I want to not have as much light hitting the front of this shark gun, and then I do want to have like a little bit of edge lighting on the front of this minigun, and then just get a little bit more pockets of like colored lighting hitting the ground in some of these spots. And then maybe even adjust a couple of these piles of bullets. But for the most part, the scene is set up. So from here on out, all I'm going to be doing is just moving some lights around and moving some, you know, small tweaks to like the bullet positions and the gun positions. But you've seen me do everything so far. What you will see me do though is you'll see me toggle off a lot of the lights on and off, so I know what I'm doing. So I might just turn off all of the lighting, including the area or the background world lighting. I gotta make sure I remember that it's at a strength of 2. Set that to 0, and then I'm gonna turn on the lights one at a time and just see what's happening with this. So like I said before, I don't want any of the light. I don't want as much light hitting the front of this. I want it more kind of lit from the back, so I might create another area light and have it lit from the back, and then I'm going to adjust this area light so it's not hitting so much of the front. So with this area light, I'm going to go to the area light properties tab, and I can change the spread of this. I can just turn the spread from 180 degrees so it's not shooting out in all directions. We'll change it to like maybe 115, I don't know. And then it's a little bit of a smaller area, but I want to angle it more towards the camera a bit so it gets more of the foreground and less of this background bits right here. So I'm just double tap R and aim it towards me. I turn off the camera for now just so we can see the overlays without the camera. And again, I'm just double tapping R to rotate the light towards the camera. So that's looking pretty good. I'm pretty happy with that. Yeah, let's go with that. So let's turn that one off, and let's turn on the blue spotlight. And so this one, I might actually have this light back a bit more. Let's bring it up and aim it down a bit more. I'm just trying to get like a kiss of lighting, just a little bit, to hit the handle of the minigun. Not too much, just so there's a subtle hint or a little more attention. Yeah, that might look good. Let's try the green spotlight. For this one, maybe we'll just aim this down here a bit more, a little bit more towards the front of the camera. Bring this back. And again, since the lighting is mostly in the correct position and color and power, it's okay if they're a little bit, different from real life. As long as they're in a general correct position, the lighting will make sense to anyone who's looking at it. For this magenta light, I'm thinking I want a little bit more of it visible on the ground here, and maybe a little bit of it hitting the rocket launcher. So let's make the spot size a little bit bigger. Something like that. That looks pretty good. Cool. Let's see how all these lights look when you turn them back on together. And then let's turn the background light back on again to 2. And yeah, I'm liking the way that looks a lot. That looks much better to me. I might turn the area light down. Let's try something like 10. Let's try that off for a second. Okay, cool. So let's try 5 watts, just because I want a little bit more color on the ground. Yeah, I actually kind of like that. It's fine if there's not so much color. I can actually adjust that in Photoshop if I want a little bit more. And then let's duplicate this area light, and let's bring this back a bit. And I'm going to have it just above that shark. And if I turn off all the other lights, because I want to see what just that light's doing. So we can see this duplicated area light. We'll call this shark light. I just want to call a little bit more attention to the silhouette of the shark. Turn the beam shape down so it's not hitting anything else. Okay, cool. And then let's make that maybe a little bit more greenish blue, just for a nice pop of color, something like that. That looks cool. And let's duplicate that area light one more time. And let's bring it closer to the camera. We'll call this one minigun light. Let's turn off the shark light and grab that minigun light and bring it closer to the camera. Let's turn the power way down, like 5. Let's turn the size of it down. Maybe bring it a little bit farther away and aimed up a bit more. Alright, cool. Now we got this nice little edge lighting on the minigun here. Let's turn the power all the way down, and let's just turn it back up to like maybe 1. Nothing crazy strong. Okay, cool. Now let's see how all the other lights look together. And yeah, that's looking pretty good. I don't know actually. Maybe I'm not gonna. Yeah, I'm gonna get rid of that minigun light. I actually don't like how it looks. So, yeah, I'm pretty happy with how this looks. This is looking very close to what I had in my mind. I kind of want a little bit more of blue though. Like, not blue, but more of the bullets in the blue. So maybe let's select a few of these blue lights, or these blue bullets. And I'm just going to, whoops. No, I'll select a bunch from here. I'm going to select some of these blue bullets. And I just want to duplicate just those blue ones a bunch of times. So again, I'm selecting them, and just moving them using G to grab and then Shift Z. So I'm not moving up and down, I'm just moving it left and right. Alt D, then Shift Z, or Alt D, grab, Shift Z, Alt D, Shift Z, over and over again. Just so there's a little bit more blue. Yeah, that's looking much better. I like that. So the main 3D render that you see, the main image, is called your beauty pass. But there's other things that you can render out that are information that you can help inside of compositing phases. So whether that's compositing in After Effects or Photoshop or Nuke or Fusion, whatever, 3D almost always has extra passes. And so one of those passes is a mist pass. That is what we're going to do. So if I go over to the View Layers property tab over here on the right side, click on that. Right now we have the combined. That's the beauty pass. But if we click on mist pass, we're gonna have one more image that's saved out called the mist pass. And to preview what a mist pass is, up at the top here, I'm gonna click on this drop down box. And under render passes, we're looking at the combined. If I click on this, I can click on mist. And let's just disable our overlays for now. This is a mist pass, and all it is it's kind of like a fog almost. So things that are close to the camera are black and things that are far away are white. We can adjust this by clicking in the World tab and then open up the Mist Properties tab here. Let's set the start to 0, so it starts at the camera. And the depth, let's just say 50, maybe 100. Let's see how that looks. Well, we'll do 50. 25. Yeah, I like the way that looks. And then so now what you can see is things that are close to the camera, again, are black, and it gets lighter as you get farther away. This information you can use to create more fog inside of Photoshop, or you can use it to help isolate different layers. So if you want to put like fire or smoke or something behind, let's say, this shark, you can very quickly do that with the mist pass and just adjust the levels of the mist pass so it has more or less contrast, isolating different areas in depth of your image. So we're going to save that out in addition to the combined beauty pass, which is this right here. So in terms of render settings, I have here, I'm using cycles, GPU, and then I have max samples of 500 with denoise turned on. And as far as light paths goes, I just have like the default settings here. But for volume, I actually want a little bit more light bouncing around inside of the fog. So I'm going to turn this from 0 to 1. And you're going to see the fog get a little bit brighter because light is bouncing around a little bit more inside of the fog. So at this point, I'm pretty happy with everything. I'm going to go ahead and render this image out. And I'm going to show you how to save out not only the combined beauty pass, but also the mist pass. So before I hit render, I want to save up resources on my computer. I'm going to go ahead and go back to the solid shading mode, go up to render and hit render image. And depending on how strong your computer is, this might take a minute, it might take 5 minutes, it might take an hour. It just depends on how strong your computer is. And real quick, as you can see here, for some reason, my human reference object is showing up in the render. So let me just cancel this. If this happens, if you ever see an object in your viewport that in your render that's not supposed to be there, if you click on the human reference object here, you can see I have here, it's turned off in the viewport, but it's not turned off in the render. This little camera icon means it's going to render. So I want that turned off in the render as well. Now if I hit render image, it's going to start thinking and compiling the image, and it should look exactly how I saw it inside of the viewport. So once your image is done rendering, just go up to image, save as, navigate to the folder you want to save it as. We'll call this CG Beauty Pass 01, version 01. And for the file format, PNG is fine. RGB, we don't need RGBA since there's nothing transparent. And 16-bit color depth is fine. And go ahead and hit save image. And then now to save the mist pass, well, let's let this finish writing. To save the mist pass, once your render is done, go up to where it says combine at the top right here and change this to mist. And now we can see the mist pass. And so to save this out, same thing, just go to image, save as, and we'll call this CG Mist Pass version 01. And I like to do that just in case I go back and create a different version. I have things organized. And again, RGB 16 bits is fine, and hit save image. And then now we have both the beauty pass, which is the combined, and the mist pass saved out onto our hard drive, which we can bring into Photoshop. Okay, so now we are inside of Photoshop, and all we have to do is just bring in those two images that we created, the beauty pass and the mist pass. And we can go ahead and turn off that mist pass for now. And so at this point, and actually, as you can see, things got misaligned for some reason, so just make sure that everything is lined up perfectly, otherwise you're going to have a lot of issues later. Okay, so at this point, we want to incorporate our two elements together, or we want to combine our two elements together so they live in the same world. And there's a lot of different steps in the compositing phase to get everything to match together. But the first and foremost thing that we can do is to have shadows, because if we zoom in on here, we can see we have our subject, right? And we have our background, but we have no shadows on the ground from our subject. And if we look in our original, there are shadows. And so like I said before, we can retain some of these shadows and keep them in our new image. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a duplicate of our background layer, of our backup of our subject. And we're going to call this shadows. And let's just drag this into our subject folder. Let's bring this to the very bottom below everything. So what we want out of this image is we want to have, and just so we can see what's going on here, I'm going to just lasso select this part of the image right here. I'm just going to create a layer mask for that. Okay, cool. So if we isolate it, we just have this part brought behind everything. What we want out of this is we want the light parts of this image to be invisible and the dark parts to be still visible. And we want to darken parts of the background or of the CG layer with the values of that shadow. So to do this, we can click on that shadows layer and set the blending mode of that shadows to multiply. And what that does is it darkens everything. And as you can see here, we now can see shadows darkening the CG ground, but also it's darkening it everywhere. So we want to increase the contrast ratios of that so that the lighter parts are not darkening and the darker parts are darkening. So what we can do is we can create a, above our shadows layer, let's create a levels adjustment. And what we want to do is we Alt or Option click between these two layers so we clip the levels to the shadows. That means whatever we do on this levels adjustment layer is only affecting the shadows layer. And another way to create a clipping mask is just to, on this adjustment layer above the shadows layer, just right click it and say create clipping mask. And so you can see this little arrow here is pointing at the shadows layer. That means this adjustment is only affecting this layer right here. And so what we can do is we can take this levels, make sure we have the levels thumbnail selected, and just drag the slider over to the right. And this increases the white point. And if we want, we can darken the dark points, bringing the slider over, and we just play around with these sliders until we see the shadows of our original image come through. And just like that, we can see the original shadows underneath. If I toggle this on and off, we can see these shadows are now visible. That's exactly what we want. We might still see a little bit of things near the edges here. You can see here the shadows layer is kind of at the edges of the photograph. We can kind of see some of the shadows. So it's really easy. We'll just paint those out. Same thing with over here. We can see the edges of that shadow layer that we created. We'll paint those out as well. We can even see parts of the light from the original photograph, which we'll also want to paint out. But now we have these shadows. We'll create a new group called shadows and just make sure that shadow layer and the adjustment layer for that are both in there. And under shadows, we'll Alt click on the layer mask for that group. And so this group of shadows has a black layer mask, so it's completely invisible. And just like we did for the hair earlier, on that layer mask for the shadows with the brush, we're going to paint white. And that is going to reveal those parts of the shadow layer. And what we want to do is make sure that this hardness is turned all the way down so we have a nice soft brush. We don't want any hard edges. We want soft edges around the shadow layer because we want it to blend in underneath. So just painting in on these areas where we want those shadows. And just like that, we have a fairly convincing shadow layer that is from our original image that we can use onto this new CG background. Now, obviously, we might want to adjust the colors. So the purple here might be a little too dark or too saturated compared to everything else. So we can either increase the saturation of the CG image to match that, or we can decrease the saturation of our original image to match the CG. But we'll do that in a bit. We want to address a couple other things. So on our subject group that has our shadows and our original subject, we want to add a layer mask to that. And the reason for that is because we have stuff, CG stuff, computer generated 3D objects, that should be in front. Like this hair right here should be behind this handle. So to fix that, with the layer mask selected of the subject group, just grab a brush, set it to black, and just start painting away. If I paint too much, that's okay. And just set it to white again and bring it back. And just follow the blurred edges of this object to bring it back. Hide these parts and then bring it back. Now there are automated ways of doing this using layer masks that you can export out of Blender, but this is such a simple task right now that we don't actually need to do that. So we'll do that. And it is kind of bugging me that the shadows here are so purple. So I'm going to go back to the subject shadow layer. I'm going to create a new adjustment layer in between, so that way it's automatically clipped to the shadows. And I'll just turn the saturation down a little bit. Something like that. Not too much. Okay, so at this point, I'm fairly happy with the shadows that are in my image, and I now have like the foreground of my CG properly in front of my subject. And so at this point, I want to just basically balance out my image. I want to just adjust my image to get a better, stronger starting point for my composite. So what I want to do is I want to create above my CG background, I'm going to create a levels adjustment layer. And then I'm going to click on that adjustment layer icon. And I'm just going to start moving around these sliders just so I can get like a good basis for my CG. So by default, the CG background is kind of low contrasty. It's not very punchy. Whereas my original image has a little bit more contrast and punch to it. So I'm going to click on or just enable that levels adjustment layer and just start moving sliders around. I'm messing with the gamma, which is this center point right here. Maybe bring up the bright points of the whites and darkening the darks a little bit. And just playing around with these sliders, massaging them left and right, and just seeing if it brings it in a direction that I like it. There's no right or wrong answer or right or wrong way to do this necessarily. We're just kind of bringing the image into a point that we like. In terms of actually compositing and getting all the elements to match, there are some steps that we can take. But for right now, all I'm really focused on is trying to get the background image to have a similar level of punch and contrast as my original photograph. Okay, cool. So I'm pretty happy with the way this looks. But now that everything's a little too dark, I do want to bring little bits of focal point interests to my CG background. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create, let's rename this base contrast for this adjustment layer. And let's create a new one. And we'll call this focused attention contrast. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to bring up the white point a little bit. And I'm going to invert the layer mask of that. And I'm going to press B to bring up my brush tool. And I'm just going to, with the low flow, maybe around 20%, I'm just going to paint on little parts of my image that I want just a little more attention to. A little bit more on the foreground here, a little bit on the gun here, and maybe a little more on a couple of these bullets back here. Maybe a little bit more in the foreground. Okay, cool. So if I turn this off and on, you can see here It's not doing a whole lot. It's just adding a couple, just like 5% more interest or attention to a couple of these high interest areas. And that's your call to make, what you want, where you want to bring the attention to on your photograph. So at this point, I want to add a little bit extra layer of fog to the background. I want to just kind of try and conceal a little bit more of these bullets that are fading off into the background. And I want to do that by using the color of the background that pre-exists. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to first create a solid color adjustment layer. I hit OK, and then I'm going to turn that off, and then I'm going to double click on the adjustment layer, or the solid color adjustment layer, to bring this box up. And I'm just going to solid color pick, or eyedropper pick, the background color. Hit OK. So if I turn that back on again, we're going to see that we just have a solid blue color. That's the color of our background. And we want this to be our fog, but we don't want it to be everywhere, right? So what we could do is we can click on the layer mask of that fog, right? And with a brush, we can paint black and white to reveal or hide parts of that layer mask, parts of that solid color adjustment layer. But instead of painting it, we want to use something that will help us. And that something is the mist pass that we created earlier. So I'm going to go ahead and delete the layer mask for this solid color, and we'll call this fog. I'm going to turn that off for now. Let's duplicate our mist pass because we want to keep a backup of it. And we're going to name this fog mask, right? Let's turn on the visibility of this fog mask. And so if we're thinking of this image as a layer mask, anything that's white is fully opaque. Anything that's black is fully transparent. So it's already pretty much where we want it to be. We want the fog to be more opaque or visible in the background, and as it gets closer to the camera, we want that fog to be invisible or transparent. So let's just go ahead and Control A, select, Control A and copy this whole image right here, the fog mask. Let's turn it off. Now let's re-enable the fog layer. Make sure you select that fog layer and add a layer mask to it. And then Alt-click into the layer mask of the fog layer and press Ctrl or Command V to paste that mist pass into the layer mask of the fog layer. Now if I Alt-click to get out of that view, we can see here we now have fog that's fading off into the background. If I change this to a different color, you'll see what's going on here. So this is also another way that you can use to change the color of the fog too. But we can see that we have a solid color of the color we chose, and if we look at the layer mask, it's fading as it gets closer to the camera. So let's make that back to a color of blue, and let's bring that fog layer below our subject, because we don't want it in front of our subject, we want it behind our subject. And if we just toggle this layer on and off, we can see that the background here is now falling off into a deeper layer of fog. We can see over here in this whole area how the bullets just kind of fall off into nothingness. We can see no definitive line of where the bullets start and end because of this added layer of fog. And of course, because this is a solid color adjustment layer, we can click on here and we can change the color of the fog. We can make it less saturated, more saturated, we can make it brighter, we can make it darker. We could change the colors of it. I'm going to keep it blue. I'm going to keep it kind of a dark saturated blue, something like this. This looks pretty good. I'm liking the way this looks. Actually, you know, it's almost cool to see it bright too, but I'm going to keep it dark for now. And then to help the subject pop from the background, I want to add like a little bit of haze and almost like light scattering in different areas. So above my fog layer and below my subject layer, I'm going to create a new layer. I'm going to call this, I don't know, we'll call it bloom, or no, we'll call it haze. Lighter haze. We're going to set this layer to screen. And with a big soft brush, I'm just going to sample the background color. Let's make it a little bit brighter and less saturated. And just kind of painting a little bit of haze coming from the top. Just something that gives a little bit of separation of our subject from the background. And we can just press Control T and resize that how we want to. something like that. And maybe turn the strength all the way down to 0. And let's just bring it back in slowly. Maybe something like, yeah, something around there looks pretty good. Okay, so at this point, I just want to add like a little bit more visual interest to the background, more specifically up here in the air. So I'm thinking I'm going to add a little bit of dust particles and whatnot. And to do that, simply, all I'm going to do is I'm just going to get like I'm just going to look up some stars or a galaxy, whatever, on a free stock image website. So pixels, I'm just going to select this one. This one looks pretty cool. Nothing that's too complicated. And let's just, it doesn't need to be that large, but whatever. We'll download the original. And let's just bring this into Photoshop. And so I'm going to bring this galaxy image behind my subject. And let's go ahead and let's desaturate this first and foremost, because I don't want to keep the original colors. All I really want are just these little specks of light and whatnot. And so I'm going to go ahead and press Control L on this, just to kind of crush in the levels a bit. Bring in the black value, just so we don't see all of the stars, just a little bit of it. Then maybe bring in the white point a bit and hit OK. So we have something that looks kind of like this. Now if I set this image to screen, all of a sudden I have like a kind of a nice little bits of dust particles in the air. I'm going to maybe turn this sideways just so it's coming more from the top like that. This looks pretty cool. And then I'm going to add an inverted layer mask to this layer. So with the layer selected, I'm going to hold Alt or Option and click on the layer mask button. So now it's completely invisible. And let's go ahead and just rename this to dust particles. And with the layer mask of the dust particles selected, I'm going to press B to bring up the brush tool. And I'm just going to paint in some dust. Now I think this is probably way too strong. Like there's just way too much dust everywhere. So what I am going to do is I'm going to go back to that levels adjustment. Click on the layer mask, or click on the layer itself, and press Control L again, and just bring in this black value, this black point. Just bring it up a bit so a lot of this disappears. Something like that looks pretty good. And then, yeah, I'm gonna go back to that layer mask and just paint away some of the stuff. It doesn't need to be everywhere, and it doesn't need to be very strong of an effect. Honestly, just a couple things, a couple little particulates here and there go a long way. It's very easy to go overboard with atmospherics and stuff like that. So just adding a couple things here and there, and that should be more than enough. Honestly, I think that looks really good right there. If you wanted to, I could maybe I could duplicate this layer and bring it over. Let's get rid of the layer mask. Let's make this a little bit smaller. And let's add inverted layer mask again. And again, just kind of paint in a couple different areas here and there. We'll do it one more time on the right side. Duplicate that layer. Get rid of the layer mask and bring it over here. And let's just add an inverted layer mask. And paint in just a couple spots here and there. Okay, yeah, I'm liking the way that looks. So at this point, I'm pretty happy with the edit. I think it's very much in the direction I was looking for. And as I've said before, once you're done with your compositing phase, and when I say compositing phase, I mean matching the two images together. That's your subject image, the photographic elements, whether that's just your subject or maybe the buildings, whatever's original, you want to match that with the CG. That process is called compositing. And there's very many steps that you can take, and you can make it as complex and lengthy as you want to. It really just depends on your tastes, how well the CG images match the real life images. And but for this step, really all it really took was just adding a little bit of fog in the background and adjusting the contrast ratios and the contrast of the background. The colors look pretty good already. Because I was using the real life reference to place my 3D lights in the scene, the colors pretty much already match. So at this point, I am pretty happy with my image as a whole. All of the elements blend in together with each other very nicely. There's the shadows. I've added contrast to the CG foreground and midground to help match that of my photographic image, the subject. I've erased away parts of the subject that should be occluded by foreground elements, such as this handle down here. And at this point, I want to do a couple extra steps to just kind of blend in the CG elements with the real life elements. And I pretty much do this step on almost all of my images. It just really depends on how stylized I want everything to do. So to do this, I'm going to create what's called a stamp visible layer. And in Photoshop, all you're going to do is press Control, Shift, Alt, and E. Or it's Command, Option, Alt, or Command, Option, and Shift, E if you're on a Mac. And make sure that you have the topmost layer selected, and that's this subject group. So Control, Alt, Shift, and E, and it creates one layer on top of everything. And so if I click on that and move it around, you can see it just merged everything that's visible onto one layer on top. And so this is going to be my starting point now. So what I first want to do is I want to add a little bit of chromatic aberration to the whole image together. And chromatic aberration basically just means around hard edges of your image, there's going to be a little bit of color fringing that happens. And this happens in real images that you take with your photo, but it's not present in CG elements unless you add it there. But right now there's not anything, and there shouldn't be very much in the photo to begin with. There's actually a little bit of chromatic aberration on here. You can see on the edges of this ring, there's a little bit of color bleed. It's not actually too visible on this, which is great because we're going to add it to the image as a whole. Depending on the quality of your lens, good lenses generally don't have very much chromatic aberration. So if you like that, you got to add it back in. So to do that, I have this base layer. I'm going to create a duplicate of this layer. So let's call this first one base layer, and we'll call this one chromatic aberration. What I'm going to do is I'm going to double click that chromatic aberration layer that brings up this layer styles panel. And what I'm going to do is with the blending options tab selected, I'm going to turn off one of these channels, RG and B, red, green, and blue. I'm going to turn off one of them, and there's no rhyme or reason. I'm just going to pick one of them to start with. So I'm going to turn off the red channel and hit OK. And nothing's going to change unless I start moving this layer. If I start moving this layer, all of a sudden you see a color toning split. And that's because I have the red channel turned off on this layer. And so I only see the blue and yellow, or the blue and green channels. But we don't want to move that a lot. We just want to move that a couple pixels. So let's look at an area like here. With this chromatic aberration layer selected, I'm going to press left or right on my keyboard. And if you look at the edges of this bullet here, or any of these bullets, you're going to all of a sudden see this little color split effect. If you push it a lot, you're going to get this weird like 3D looking type color split. We don't want that. We just want it to be a couple pixels of offset. And that just creates a slight amount of color aberration around the edges of these objects, because that's something that you get in real life. It also happens on the edges of this image here of your photo, because again, it's on top of everything. But yeah, just a simple couple pixel difference. If I turn that off and on, oh, actually I undid it, sorry, but go back. It's just a couple pixel difference. And depending on which channel you turn off, so if I go back to this layer styles, if I turn red back on and turn off green, you're going to get a different color fringing. This one's a little bit more purple and green. And I actually like that better because of just the color tones of the image as a whole. So looking at this bullet back here, I'm gonna change the offset so it's not as strong. So just like 1 or 2 pixels. This is without and this is with. Very subtle change, but it does make a difference. And then now I'm going to create another stamp visible layer on top of everything. And we're going to call this edge blur. And then for my edge blur, all I'm doing with an edge blur is I want to kind of emulate the softer edges of the frame that you get with the camera. Whenever you take an image with your camera, unless you have like the highest quality lens and a high quality everything, around the borders of your image, you're generally going to get a little bit softer, a softer image around the edges. It's going to be slightly blurred. Maybe not like blurry, but it's just not going to be as sharp around the edges. And I want to kind of replicate that effect on the CG itself as well. So with that stamp visible layer on top, the edge blur layer that I just created, I'm going to select the elliptical marquee tool. And at the top corner of one selection, or at a top corner of one part of my image, I'm going to drag all the way down to the bottom right corner of the opposite side. And then I'm going to go to select, modify, feather. And I'm going to feather this by about 300 pixels. So now I just have a big soft feathered selection of the center of my image. I want to invert that, so I'm just selecting a feathered selection of my edges. So I'm going to go to select and then inverse. So now I have an inverse selection that's feathered of my image. And now I'm going to go up to filter, blur, and then I think maybe filter, blur, and then let's go with a radial blur. And I'm just going to set this to zoom, and I'm going to set it to maybe 2 pixels, 2 pixel blur. And that might be too much, but we're just going to see what that does. I'm going to hit OK. I'm going to deselect everything, and let's just zoom in here on the edges. And so already I can tell that's actually way too strong. So I'm going to undo that. I'm going to go back to filter, blur, radial blur. I'm going to set it to 1 pixel and hit OK. And I'm going to deselect everything. And now let's zoom in on here at the edges here. And so you can see if I turn this off, look at all these bullets right here in the center of my screen. All these things near the edge of the screen are all perfectly sharp. They're as sharp at the edges as they are in the center. And most lenses don't have that quality. So if I turn this back on again, you're going to see I have this slight blurring, almost like a motion blur around the edges of my image, and it gets softer as I get closer to the center of my image. So depending on the size of your first initial selection, that'll depend on how feathered and subtle that transition is. But around all the borders of my image, I'm going to have this slight blurring. And that blurring is something that's visible in most images that you take with the camera. But it's not visible in CG, in 3D. So by adding this back into the 3D, you're going to get a little bit more of a photorealistic effect. So both the chromatic aberration and the edge blurring will combine together to give you something that just feels a little bit more real. So at this point, I like to do some more stylized stuff, such as glowing. Now I use a plugin called Oniric, which makes it really fun and easy to create glows on your image. But it is a paid plugin, and it's kind of spendy, but you pay one time and you have it forever. But let me just show you real quick how I do it with the plugin, and then I'll show you another way you can do it without the plugin. It's a little bit longer and harder to do, and it's not as fun, and you don't get as good of results, but you can do a similar effect. But using Oniric, I'll just create new. I'll just press new with the Oniric plugin, and it's going to do some magic on the back end, and then boom, just like that, you have like this crazy glow that's usually way too strong. So I'm just going to turn the threshold down a bit. I'm going to turn the gamma down a bit and the radius down a bit. And if I turn this off and on, actually I'll turn the threshold back up a bit. You can see it just adds like this nice glow that's kind of everywhere. And glows are very easy to go overboard with, but it's also a good thing to have, because anything that's very bright in a real photo, it's going to shoot back a lot of light towards the lens, where it's going to bounce around and create kind of a blooming glow effect. And again, this is depending on like how nice your lens is, but it is generally there in most images. When you're doing things in 3D or compositing and art, usually you're going to go overboard with that just to make it stylized and look cool. But this is still way too strong. So I'm going to create a mask inside of this, and I'm going to paint on these super bright areas. Especially on the subject and the back here. Just these really, really bright areas of my image. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to invert that mask and hit the check mark. And then it's going to recalculate that blur or that glowing in the areas except for where that was. So again, I'm going to turn the exposure down a bit, the gamma and the radius down a bit, just so I have a little bit of more of a subtle glow. And you can really see it on this part of the image too. Just looking at all these highlights, if I turn it off and back on again, it just lets a little ping of highlight on all those bright parts of the image, and it just makes it look a little bit nicer. It also helps bring things together. So I'm going to go ahead and hit save. Now real quick, before I move on, I'm going to show you how you could do something similar to that without the plugin, because I know most people don't have the money to buy the plugins. But if you have the money, it makes your life way easier, and it's a little bit more fun. So it kind of depends on what you value, your time or your money. If you don't have the money, then you got to spend your time. Okay, so that's what the glow looks like with an Eric. And let me quickly show you. There's a bunch of different ways you can do glow inside of Photoshop. So like the easiest way would be to create just a new layer, set it to, I don't know, let's say screen or whatever. Yeah, screen's fine. Select the brush tool and just make a big, make the hardness all the way down to 0. And then just all you can do is just use the Alt or Option button to kind of eyedrop parts of the image and literally just paint in. Let's turn this flow down to like 10%. Doesn't need to be that strong. And literally just paint in highlight areas. So wherever you see like bright parts of the image, you can just paint in little pings of highlights anywhere. And I mean, again, you can adjust the size of this, change the color. Yeah. That's the easiest way to do it. And sometimes it's good to do a mix of multiple different methods. But that would be the easiest way. You just paint in manually by hand, and then you can adjust the opacity of it, turn it back up and down again. If you want something that's a little bit more automated, a little bit more not straightforward, but a little bit more procedural, I guess you can say, create a stamp visible layer on top of everything. So Control Shift Alt and E, or Command Option Shift and E, and then let's put a black solid layer behind that. And so I just have these two layers, and then on this layer I'm going to double click on the main layer, the stamp visible layer, and then using this blend if slider, I'm just going to say wherever it's black, the current layer, I'm going to just drag this up. And then so now we can start to see that the dark parts of the stamp visible layer are becoming invisible. And we can probably adjust the bright points too, so it's not full bright. Yes, something like this might work. Yeah, let's go with that. And then let's just erase away some of these super bright parts of the ground. Could probably erase away part of this arm. And then now you could just merge these two together. So select these two layers and press Control or Command E. Set it to screen or add. Let's just do screen for now. And then you can just press go up to Filter, Blur, Gaussian Blur, and you can just play around with the blur of that layer. So let's just say like 30 pixels. And you could duplicate that a couple times, and then now it's brighter. What you could try doing is duplicate it once and then blur it a little bit more. So now you have one that is you have one layer that is kind of blurred, and then you have another layer that's really blurred, and then if you just put those two on top of each other, you get something that looks a little bit nicer. Yeah, so before and after. And again, you could just do this for any other layer. So let's say I want to do something that's just aimed at the subject here. So again, stamp visible layer. Let's put a black layer underneath it. Double click on the layer itself. Do blend if current layer, and let's just bring that down. And hit OK. And I'm going to erase away parts of the image that I don't want to do, like the brightest parts of the skin. Yeah, merge these two together. Blur. Actually, let's set the screen first. Then blur. And do it one more time. Duplicate, blur with an even higher blur. Cool. And then put these two layers together. Put them in a group if you want to. Add an inverted layer mask to that group, and then you could just paint in those glowing highlights to different parts of your image, and it just kind of helps soften bits of the image. Very similar to what the Oneric plugin does, but obviously not as convenient, not as fast, and not as much control. But yeah, that's just a simple way to do it. But I'm going to stick with the Oneric layer just for now, just because I like the way it looks. And I'm going to create one more for this skin. So I'm going to open up the Oniric add-on, hit new. And then this glow, I just want to do something that kind of glows around the face skin a bit. So let's go on, add a layer mask. And I'm just going to paint around the face and the hair a bit. And hit OK. Turn up the threshold. Turn the gamma down and the radius down. Exposure down a little bit too. Threshold up a little bit more. Let's just see how this looks. I like the way that looks. Actually, I want to get rid of this bright part here. So I'm going to edit the mask. I'm going to erase away this brightest part and redo that. Something like that looks good. Yeah. Maybe a little bit brighter. Cool. Now I'm going to save that. Okay, so yeah, these are the two just glow layers that I got from Oniric. I could probably turn the brightness down on this one right here. It doesn't need to be as bright on the hands. Okay, cool. And then one more time, as usual, I'm going to create another stamp visible layer of everything. And on this layer, I'm going to add a bit of sharpening. So I'm just going to go to Filter, Sharpen, Unsharpen Mask. And I like to do this in two passes. One, I like to sharpen everything but the face. And then I like to sharpen just the face. Just because generally I don't want as much sharpening on the face as everywhere else. So I'm going to turn the strength up all the way first. And then I'm going to add an inverted layer mask. I'm going to add a layer mask to that. We'll call this base sharpening. Add a layer mask and just erase away parts of the face because generally that sharpening will be too much for the face. Oops, make sure we're painting on the layer mask, not the layer. And then create one more stamp visible layer with and just we're going to drag that same layer mask onto the face sharpening layer and just invert the layer mask. And then click on the layer itself, go up to Filter, Sharpen, Unsharpen Mask, and same thing as before, but maybe just a lower radius and a lower amount. Not quite as much. And hit OK. All right, great, cool. Now, one last time, I'm going to merge all layers into one layer on top using a stamp visible, and we'll call this toning, for color toning. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to open up this layer in Camera Raw. So Filter, Camera Raw, and Camera Raw is essentially just Lightroom adjustments, but in Photoshop. And this is like kind of what you would do if you took an image with your camera with no like CG or anything, just like a regular photo, and you wanted to edit it inside of Photoshop, you'd probably use something similar to this. And all I'm doing in here is I'm just messing around with like contrast levels and exposures, this and that. This blue part down here just tells me that this is fully black down here, so I can turn off the indicator because I don't care. But this is purely just based on your tastes as a photographer and as a retoucher. So everything I'm doing in here, this is not necessarily supposed to be like tutorial mode. This is just edit the image to your liking. So I'm just going to create moving sliders one at a time until I see something that I like. I'm going to add like a little bit of contrast. Go in the Colors tab, maybe boost the vibrance a little bit. Under the effects, I'm going to probably add a little bit of clarity, a little bit of texture, not too much. I don't want to go overboard with this, but just add a little bit of texture pop and clarity pop. I could probably reduce the contrast a bit because of that. Let's go back here. Let's see if dehaze adds anything. Yeah, I like what dehaze is doing. Just kind of helps crisp things up a bit, add a little bit of punchiness to the colors. Go with the curves and I'm just, like I said, I'm just messing around with these sliders just to see if they do things that I like what it's doing. If I don't like what it's doing, I'll move it the other way and see if I get better results. Back to the effects tab, I am going to add some film grain on top of everything, so I'm going to turn this up all the way, and I'm just going to dial in the size and the roughness of my grain, turn back down to 0, and then maybe just crank it up to something like 20% or so. Something like that. Yeah. 20% looks good. And let's go back down. Let's go to the color mixer tab. Here we can play around with the different colors. Like maybe I can tone down the purples a bit. So go to the saturation, click on this tool right here, and just kind of turn the saturation of the purples down a bit. Maybe increase the greens a bit. Increase the blues a bit. The luminance values, play around with that a bit too. Okay, and then moving on, I'm going to do some color grading tab. And this is just to introduce just some more uniform color to the whole image. So like, for example, if I play around with the highlights slider here, if I bring this all the way over to orange, what that's doing is just it's adding orange to all of the highlights. So that way, like for example, in the base image, the colors that are naturally found in the highlights of my CG might not necessarily have the same colors that are naturally found in the highlights of my photo. So this just kind of helps introduce a little bit of uniform color toning in both the highlights and shadows and midtones of all the elements together as a whole. What I like to do is first I'll bring up the saturation all the way, and then I will simply just move the slider around until I see some color toning that I like. I like these, like this bluish green, I like that, and then I'll just go ahead and bring the saturation back down, and then just reintroduce it subtly. And the same thing with the shadows, I'll bring that all the way. Let's bring this color wheel around until I see something that I like. I'm liking these like purple reds a little bit, so, and then I'll bring that saturation back down to 0, and then just subtly bring it back up again. And let's just see, toggle that on and off. Just kind of helps bring the colors a little bit more uniform together. Great, yeah. And that's essentially what I'll do inside of Camera Raw. Everything looks good. At this point, I might create a preset, just save and go to Save Settings and create a preset, just so I can go back to this if I want to. And I'll just hit OK. And then from here, the very last step of my color toning phase is generally I'll go up to color lookup. I'll create a color lookup adjustment layer. And from here, I'll just add a LUT. And so this list of LUTs is just a bunch of some of my favorite ones that I found over time. You can get a lot of free LUTs online for free. And just go to Photoshop or go to Google and type in how to install LUTs into Photoshop. And you'll figure out where on your computer to put your LUTs. And they'll show up here under your color lookup adjustment layer. So from here, I'll just click on the first one. Yeah. And then I'll just press the down arrow and I'll cycle through these, all of my LUTs, and I'll just see if I have a happy accident in terms of coloring. If I see something that gives me colors and tones that I really, really like, I'll probably stop there, and then I'll just adjust it. I'll turn the strength down and make some small tweaks to things. But I'm just going through these LUTs and trying to find something that I like. If I don't like anything, that's fine too, but generally I'll try and find some sort of LUT that just brings my image that extra 10-20% oomph that I like. That's just the extra spice, you know what I mean? So I'm liking this, but obviously the effect is way too strong. So I'm just going to turn the opacity down to like 15-20%, something like that. So yeah, everyone, that's my process from start to finish for creating this image. Hopefully you were able to pick something useful out from this video. Let me know if there's anything that you want me to talk about more in the comments below. Just ask about something and I'll try and create a better video about it. And if you have any questions or comments or whatever, yeah, please let me know down below, and consider subscribing if you want to see more stuff like this in the future. Goodbye.